Chapter 11, Creel is back. Natasha Romanoff/Black Widow. Once Steve had finished speaking, everyone stared at Pierce. Rockwell, a tall man with little hair on his pale head, spoke first. "You smug son of a bitch," Rockwell said in disgust. Natasha quirked an eyebrow at that. "My god." The room turned to look at Yen, who was staring out the window. Everyone looked as well, and Pierce's jaw dropped. "What in the hell?" Pierce said slowly. Natasha found herself staring as well. A mountain was rising out of the river. Hundreds of spires rising into the air, grinding against one another. They were made of beautiful blue-green gems, each ending at a point she suspected were sharper than anything man-made, and the whole mass rose until was larger than the building she stood in. When it finally stopped growing, it overshadowed everything around it, shining in the sunlight and casting a green light. "That damn monster," Pierce growled. Just then, people rushed into the room. 12 in all, wearing the black military gear. As they entered, the councilperson's phones shone a bright red. "Damn," Rockwell said. "Hydra." Pierce smiled at them. "Well, I suppose Captain Rogers had quite the plan." Pierce turned to one of the men. Jack Rollins, the man who had knocked out Dial yesterday. Natasha noted him. "Bring out the sonic cannons and have them destroy that damn thing. If we can get rid of it, we can still get the helicarriers in the air." Natasha chose that moment to act while she still had the element of surprise. The things Pierce was referring to were likely weapons that Accutac, a subsidiary of Stark Industries, had made for the US military, weapons that had the capability to fire focused sonic blasts that had been one of the few things that noticeably harmed the Hulk. What made things worse is that powerful sonic attacks were one of the few things that were capable of breaking down Diamond Head's crystals, according to Dial during their planning. How the hell did Hydra find that out so quickly? She knew Dial leaving behind so much of the stuff was a bad idea, but they were in no position to clean up with all their running around. Didn't matter, she wasn't going to give them the chance to clear the hangar doors. Pierce turned in time to get a punch in the face from an elderly female politician and fall onto his back in surprise. Rollins swung at her. Natasha ducked his punch, leaped onto his shoulders and wrapped her thighs around his neck before spinning around, sending Rollins to the ground. She grabbed his pistol and fired quickly at the other soldiers in the room. 5 men, too surprised to respond fast enough, attempted to aim their guns at her. She killed one with a single bullet, then dragged his body in front of her to block another man's shot, kicking the body of the man she'd killed for with an hand shooting once more. Behind her, another 6 aimed. Then Yen shot one in the head with an arrow. He smirked as he held his hand out. A bow made of blue light was being projected from his watch, which had flattened out into a grip. "Huh, it works." The other man aimed at Yen. He was already firing before they could get their guns on him. He pulled back the string of blue light, and his watch produced a single arrow of purple light. He fired it, then pulled the string again. Natasha blocked a desperate punch, then grabbed the man's arm and twisted it around. With a quirk of her hips, the man was on the ground, where she put a bullet in his head. One of the last men tried to run. An arrow to the knee ended that misadventure, and an arrow to the head did worse than that. Pierce staggered to his feet in time to see Yen toss aside the watch, which was destroyed in a small explosion. Yen picked up a fallen pistol and pointed it at Pierce. "Hey, boss." Pierce turned to look at Holly, who shot a bullet into Rollins' head, then pointed her gun at Pierce as well. "Sorry." Yen and Holly lifted hands up and removed the skin-tight masks that had changed their appearances, their holograms turning off and revealing Clint and Natasha. The pair smiled. "Did we step on your moment?" Outside, helicopter blades could be heard. The chopper came closer, then landed on the helipad connected to the room. Pierce stared in shock once more when Nick Fury walked into the room holding a bow and quiver, which he tossed to Clint. "I know." Nick's lips slowly rose into a smile, his eye narrowing at Pierce. "This just isn't your day, Alex." Sam Wilson/Falcon. "Damn," Sam said as the final crystal spire rose up. "Just, damn. Thank God he's on our side," Maria said softly. The 3 soldiers watched for a moment longer before Steve turned. "Okay, you know the plan. Maria, you have the floor." "You got it, Steve." "Sam, with me. Let's do it." Maria walked over to the computers and started to work. Sam looked back at her as he and Steve walked out. "You sure they don't need backup?" Sam said, referring to X and Jarvis as well. "They are the backup," Steve said without hesitation. "Come on, we need to clear this base. You and I will work outside." Moments later, a Hydra soldier's body was thrown through a pair of doors. Steve and Sam ran through the doors, exiting the Triskelion and seeing the crystal mountain that Dial had created. Sam looked up at the massive structure as they sprinted towards where they could see pilots headed towards the Quinjets. At their hips, Sam and Steve's phones flashed green as they came closer to a group of pilots, who held phones up that flashed green as well. A Quinjet was already rising into the sky. When the pilots saw Sam and Steve come close, they went to join them. "Sir," one pilot said, wearing the same blue helmet and flight gear as the others. "Deputy Director Hill sent us to provide air support." "All right," Steve said. "From now on, you follow this man. His call sign will be Falcon Leader." Steve pointed at Sam, who the pilots nodded at. "Any heavy ordnance they got, you down." A rocket-propelled grenade flew from a rooftop nearby, slamming into one of the rising Quinjet's wing. Steve held up his shield to block some shrapnel as pilots and technicians dodged the exploding aircraft, 2 people getting crushed underneath it. Sam looked up at the rooftop where the grenade had come from, Steve looking as well. The Winter Soldier leaped from the rooftop and started walking towards them. Sam, get those pilots in the air, Steve said, rushing forward. Cap dash. Now, Steve shouted. We can't let any of their Quinjets control the sky. Sam cursed. But he knew it was true. All right, you heard the Cap. Sam told the pilots. Get into the air. The pilots took a moment to watch as Captain America smacked away a grenade Bucky shot at him, the explosive detonating harmlessly against the crystals to his left, before he punched at his opponent. Bucky blocked it, tossed aside his launcher to pull out a gun and started firing, forcing Steve to block with his shield before kicking the gun out of his hand. Now, Sam shouted. Spurred to action, the pilots ran for the jets. Falcon, Jarvis said. It is as we feared. Hydra has standing orders in place. While we have shut down all their communications, they are enacting several backup plans, the Quinjets we feared among them. What do we got? Sam asked, taking off into the air. They are bringing in 5 Quinjets, 3 gunships, a tank, 3 Humvees with heavy machine guns, and 3 Stark sonic cannons, Jarvis explained. The gunships are acting as air support for the ground vehicles, but the rest are flying over the crystal formation. Then I'll drag them into it. Sam flew towards the spires of blue-green his ally had created, diving among them. He folded his wings in and leaped off one, booted feet pressing against hard gemstone. He activated his jets again and leaped to the next spire. He twirled in between 2 more crystals, coming out of the other side and unfurling his wings to shoot forward. 5 Quinjets were advancing towards him. The Hercules app on his phone helpfully beeped a warning that they weren't friendly, just in case Jarvis' warning wasn't enough. He flew towards them and reached for his hips, pulling out his machine pistols and firing a rapid barrage of bullets into the cockpit of one. The pilot inside was still staring in shock at the man who had appeared from a mountain of crystal when the bullets slammed into the glass in front of him. Sam shot past the Quinjet he'd fired at with blistering speed. The enemy aircraft twisted to follow him. Quinjet pilots, this is Falcon Leader, I've got the enemy's attention. Sam pulled his wings into his pack, diving towards the water in time to dodge a barrage of bullets. I want 3 with me, the rest intercept those ground vehicles? Come in from the left when you get airborne, I'll make sure you flank them. Understood, Falcon Leader. Sam activated his wings again and pulled a sharp dive upwards, lifting into the sky as fast as he could, the G-forces pulling at his body. He rose over one Quinjet and put away one of his guns to toss a grenade, only to curse when the Quinjet twisted aside leaving the grenade to fall into the clear blue water far below, where it exploded. He pulled away, juking left as bullets began to invade his airspace. Luckily, he had cover. He flew back towards the crystal mountain and dived into it. Bullets smacked against the crystals around him as he jumped off a spire to make a massive direction change to the right. Missiles were launched, turning the area behind him into a firestorm and leaving black smudges against the gem's walls. Then Sam heard a loud ringing in his ears, and to his shock, he saw the crystals beginning to crack. He landed on a formation and poked his head out. The Quinjets were firing sonic waves at the mountain from small attachments on the wings. Suddenly Dial was speaking in his ear. Gonna be a slight delay? How is everyone else doing? Been an interesting day. Sam yelled back. Cap's fighting the Winter Soldier, and these Quinjets have sonic weapons. The mountain shuddered, and crystals started cracking faster with small pieces already beginning to break off as the hovering ships maneuvered around. Shit. Iron Man said. That sounds like Stark Tech, something one of my subsidiary companies built for the army. I got something like that in my right arm, Colonel Rhodes added, an explosion going off in the background. Natasha Romanoff / Black Widow. Looks like you came prepared, Fury noted, turning to look at Pierce. Well, not me, Pierce noted. The man smiled at the room, seemingly uncaring of the guns Natasha and Clint had pointed at him. Some members of Hydra had encountered your monster before, and they started work on analyzing his crystals immediately. I got to say, they are quite durable. If it wasn't for one of my guys having the good idea to pull out a sonic cannon we had lying around and shoot it at one, we'd have been at a loss. Fury turned to look outside. Falcon, take out those Quinjets now. Already on it. A small dot came out of the mountain to engage the aircraft as Fury watched. I got to say, as nice as it is to see you alive, Nick, I have to wonder what you're planning here. Pierce walked over to look out of the window as well. My men will have that mountain down soon. And the rest of Hydra will find a way to get those helicarriers out of the hangar base, no matter what sort of monster you have. Fury abruptly turned to walk towards the holographic screens nearby. Pierce raised an eyebrow at that. Huh. So you aren't exactly comfortable with that thing on your side. I'd have thought after putting the Hulk on the Avengers you wouldn't have cared. Oh, I'm still a bit suspicious of him, Fury answered easily. He tapped the holo screen and watched as a schematic of the building popped up. But he's useful. And I like him more than I like you right now. That's enough for me. Agent 13, have you cleared the medical level yet? As Sharon Carter responded, Pierce fingered his smartphone, eyeing the others in the room. Sharon Carter / Agent 13. Moments before the Hydra Quinjets arrived, Sharon was leading a group of agents through the building, trying to secure the medical level. They were in a research lab now, caught in a shootout with strike team members. Sharon and another agent had taken a stand behind a counter. She leaned out to fire at one of the men, a guy she'd actually been friends with before. She steeled her heart and shot him in the arm with her stolen M4A1 carbine. When he fell screaming to the linoleum, she shot him in the throat. As he bled out his last, she leaned back into cover. Deputy Director, we're finishing off the resistance in the labs now, Sharon yelled as more bullets flew overhead, some straight through her cover to buzz past her. Broken glass from beakers crunched under people's feet, the acidic smell of bleach joined by blood and smoke. Tell me there are people left. This is X, an unfamiliar voice that reminded Sharon of Matthew McConaughey said. Miss Hill is in the middle of coordinating a strike against the garage. I can see a small group of scientists holding out several rooms from you. Sharon blinked at the voice. For some reason, it rang false to her. It didn't seem real. Repeat, who is this? Virtual Intelligence X, working on the behalf of the Avengers, the voice said. Trust him, Sharon. Maria said suddenly. We need him to coordinate this attack. Feeling troubled, Sharon leaned out of cover and fired a hail of bullets. The agent next to her joined in, as did the 6 others behind her. Strike team members were the best of the best. But left unable to coordinate, they were left easy to split up and kill in the many hallways of the Triskelion. The agent next to Sharon was shot in the right eye, and fell screaming, clutching at his face. An agent behind her was killed by a bullet in the heart. But soon, all of Strike in the room was dead. Come on, Sharon yelled, indicating the man whose eye had been shot out. We can get him help in medical. One agent helped the injured man up, and they all ran to the next room. A quick sweep showed it was empty. Same with the next. The one after that, however, was full of dead bodies. Strike team members and SHIELD agents, all laying among broken glass, bullet casings, and pools of their blood. The fighting seemed to be centered on a pair of doors in the back, the SHIELD agents defending it. Who did this? One agent asked as they moved forward. Sharon ignored the bodies in favor of trying the door to the next room. The handle moved, but when she tried to push it open, something heavy was blocking it. Don't you dare come in. A voice on the other side said. I'm not letting you Hydra assholes near the patients. We're SHIELD. Sharon yelled through the door. Oh yeah? Well, let's see what Hercules has to oh thank God. The voice on the other side went from panicky to relieved. Sounds of movement behind the door lead to it being opened. Sharon blinked at the sight. A young, short, and skinny young woman, with short brown hair and a lab coat, stared at them. Despite her petite form, she was also carrying the same M4A1 carbine Sharon was. She had a purse at her side with several clips of ammo poking out of it. I thought I was going to die, she wailed, leaping forward. Sharon was surprised to catch the woman in a hug. Well we were sent to prevent that. Sharon looked behind her. Several more doctors were inside, all holding weapons in fearful hands. Patients rested in beds, some of them agents with very recent wounds. The group of agents with Sharon entered, a pleasant beep filling the room as Hercules confirmed their identities as SHIELD. The woman pulled away, wiping away tears. I'm so sorry, I didn't know who to trust. Hydra has been trying to steal our phones so they can trick people. Did it work? Sharon asked. It shouldn't have, said the voice of X from Sharon's comm unit. Jarvis and I have been using cameras in the phones and in SHIELD facilities to prevent such a tactic from working. Any Hercules app held by a Hydra agent immediately bricks the devices and sends a warning to SHIELD personnel. Sharon nodded as the woman repeated what was said by X. Agent 13, have you cleared the medical level yet? Sharon lifted a hand to her ear, turning away. Yes, sir. Good. I'll redirect some agents to help lock it down. Get some of your men to the lower levels. Rumlow is trying to secure the garage to bring in vehicles to level the playing field. Understood. Sharon turned to the woman. Barricade the room again. More men will come but we'll leave 3 people anyways. The petite woman nodded shakily. Sharon and her agents went back outside to continue the fight. Sam Wilson/Falcon. As Sharon Carter moved to assist those fighting in the garage, Sam Wilson prepared to attack the Quinjets destroying the mountain as Fury was ordering him to. Already on it, Sam leaped from the spires and started shooting at the Quinjets. He flew past them and focused his fire on the sonic cannons. His machine pistols took one out, leaving it useless sparks. The Quinjet pilots, realizing they couldn't finish their work while Falcon was dismantling them, hurried to attack him. Sam dived into the spires again. 2 Quinjets flew in after him moments later. Yeah, that's right, follow me, Sam whispered. He took a left, watching as a Quinjet dived after him. Then he shot upwards. The Quinjet tried to follow him, its rotors whining and wings twisting as it navigated the Crystal Canyon. With all the cracks having been created by the sonic weapons, portions of the mountain were falling already, some pieces landing on top of the Quinjet with loud banging noises. Sam pivoted to the right into another canyon and flew upwards, landing on a ledge. He watched the Quinjet follow, and sat for a moment. The Quinjet pilot navigated through the canyon moments later, slowly prowling through the gemstones as he searched for Sam, not seeing him about 20 feet above. Once the aircraft was below him, Sam pressed his feet against one of the spires cracked by the earlier assault. With a loud of exertion, he pushed on it. The crystal, already about to teeter below, fell with the added help. Over a ton of gemstone fell onto the Quinjet. The aircraft was sent crashing into the spikes below, exploding in a moment. Sam flew away as he heard the other Quinjet fly towards the sound of the crash. He flew up and out of the mountain, dodging the gunfire when the Quinjets outside saw him pop out of the top. He pulled his wings and flipped to face the ground. He watched the surviving Quinjet hover to the side of the crash site, and tossed a grenade towards it with a careless motion. It dropped into the right rotor of the Quinjet, and exploded, destroying that wing. The Quinjet, off balance from the missing wing, spun in place, then veered into the walls of the canyon, exploding moments later. Sam landed against a gem wall and leaped forwards. Another jump and he was out of the mountain again, appearing to the right of the Quinjets. They turned, trying to get a bead on him, which meant they were pointed to the right of the mountain when shield Quinjets came around the left side, firing. The pilots roared in unison. The shield pilots fired into the backs of the Hydra aircraft, their bullets sliced through the hulls of the other ships. The Hydra pilots struggled to escape, but were destroyed in moments, their metallic corpses falling into the river below. Done with those Quinjets, Sam yelled, veering around. He looked at the mountain. While still standing, the massive structure had been clearly affected, with cracks forming on the outside where the Hydra pilots had shot it and large chunks had already rained into the river. The damage wasn't enough to destroy it, but it had been significant. We need to stop any more of those sonic cannons from getting here though. I'm on it, Steve said, sounding stressed. Bucky is heading there. Then I'm coming too, Iron Man said. Tony, we need you to get to the computer rooms. Steve started to say. No. The sound of rockets came over the comms along with Iron Man's determined voice. I already downed my helicarrier. I'm coming. Understood, Steve said. I'll have Agent 13 divert to the computer rooms, Fury said. Sam flipped in the air and joined the shield Quinjets towards the bridge leading towards the garage. Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes/War Machine. Rhodey sighed at the impulsive nature of his best friend and focused on finishing his own task. He was flying alongside the helicarrier he was supposed to down, shooting at Hydra and saving the few shield agents within the hangar from death. He circled around and fired the machine guns on his arms at another Hydra agent, killing the man with brutal ease. The minigun on his shoulder spun to fire at another man to his right, riddling that soldier. Rhodey landed and walked towards the shield agents he'd saved. Thanks, one of the agents said, staring at him in awe. Rhodey allowed himself a momentary smile at that look. No problem. I'm going to focus on the helicarrier, you guys get to SAF-. A crate slammed into Rhodey mid-sentence. It carried him 20 feet before he slammed into the side of the helicarrier. Rhodey struggled in the air before righting himself, turning to see his assailant. I got a guy made of blue glowing metal throwing stuff at me, Rhodey asked in confusion. That shit. Bullet fire came from Dial's link. You guys are assholes? Listen, Rhodey, that is Creel. He can absorb stuff and take on their properties. Creel grabbed a forklift by its prongs and hefted it upwards, spinning around to toss it at the floating Rhodey. Rhodey floated to the right and away from the forklift, ignoring it as the small vehicle slammed into the helicarrier behind him. Rhodey lifted his guns and started shooting. His blue form is vibranium like Cap's shield, but pure. Rhodey cursed as his bullets bounced off Creel's form, then switched to the repulsor weapons in his palms. Yellow beams of power sliced through the air, colliding with the man below. Creel took the energy beams to his chest, and only responded by walking through it. He's immune to kinetic attacks, so you got to throw him. Now you tell me, Rhodey cursed, putting his hands down. He looked over at the shield operatives he had saved. Run, I got this. Yes, sir. The shield agents ran for the back. Creel ignored them to grab another crate. You know, Creel called up to Rhodey. I wanted to find the monster kid, or one of the Avengers. But I'm good with killing a copycat. Rhodey chuckled. Any other day I'd teach you a lesson. But first. Sorry Fury, but I don't have time to be strategic about this. The shoulder panels on his armor opened, revealing miniature rockets. Creel smiled, opening his arms wide to take the shot he expected. Rhodey instead raised his hands up to aim at the glowing wings on the helicarrier's left side, closest to where he floated. Before Creel could do anything, Rhodey started shooting. In seconds, the rockets and repulsor blasts started to slice through the glowing sections of the wings. No, Creel shouted, throwing the crate in his hand. Rhodey dived around it, flying away while shooting. Creel followed him, grabbing another forklift and tossing it. The forklift hit Rhodey with its right prong, the sharp metal bouncing off his back and sending him crashing to the floor. But Creel was too late. Both repulsor engines on the left side of the inside helicarrier exploded. The ship tipped to the side, the repulsor engines on the right wings sending it teetering over. Damn it! Creel cursed. Rhodey grinned under his mask. Damn it, did you just break one of my carriers? Fury asked. Just send me the bill, Tony said before a loud clanging sound was followed by the billionaire grunting in pain. Chapter 12, X and Jarvis. The following events happened simultaneously. Having given a warning to Rhodey, I looked at the Omnitrix. Still red. Damn it, you can turn me into over 1 million superpowered aliens, so why do you have the charge time of an iPhone 5? I whispered under my breath. I looked out of cover and immediately ducked my head down as bullets tried to take it off. More Hydra shooting at me, and they were cautiously coming closer when they realized they were fighting a human being rather than a monster. I pulled back into cover and checked my gun. I'd shot 6 bullets to try and drive them back, which left me with 9. I leaned back out of cover and shot at a guy trying to sneak up. He ducked behind some pipes, leaving the 3 bullets I'd shot to hit the walls and a screen nearby. I got back into cover and looked to my left to come face to face with a Hydra member. Maybe he'd simply sneaked around to flank me, or dropped down from a catwalk nearby. Either way, the Hydra crewman was only a few feet away when we met eyes. He had pale white skin, with some crow's feet at the edges of his eyes. He was wearing a hat and a blue uniform with the word Insight stitched over his left pectoral. He was also carrying a gun. He froze at the same moment I did. Then he raised the big assault rifle in his hands. I leapt for him and grabbed at the gun, dropping mine in the process. We struggled as I began pushing him back. I was bigger than he was and had more muscle mass. He must have been an engineer, not a true killer. Not that he wasn't willing to murder me now. He grunted when I pushed him back into some pipes. He pulled the trigger on his gun, the rifle bouncing as we struggled with it. Bullets shot into the air until the clip emptied. I tried to knee him in the ribs but bounced off his hip instead. He headbutted towards my face but got me in the neck instead, his forehead barely touching me and thus having no effect. Grack! He shouted, trying to fight me. He kneed me in the side, the move forcing me to stagger slightly. He pulled away, letting go of his assault rifle and reaching for a handgun at his side. I grabbed at his right wrist before he could get the gun. He used his left hand to go for the knife I still had sheathed at my own hip. In a quick motion, he pulled it out and stabbed it at my neck. I pulled back enough to get a cut along my cheek that felt like fire running along the right side of my face. The guy pulled back to stab at me again, and I got my hand in the way. A scream was ripped from me when my palm was sliced before I got a grip on his fist. Blood poured from the wound, spilling down my cheek, out of my palm to pool in between our hands. He struggled to stab upwards. Our eyes met. He stared at me, and I could hear him whispering, "Hail Hydra." The knife crept up to my neck. I struggled to keep a grip as my own blood made my hand slip on his fist. "Hail Hydra." I stopped focusing on the hand holding his knife. Instead, I let go of the hand that had gone for his handgun and pulled it out of the holster myself, copying his earlier move. With the sort of desperate clarity only adrenaline gives you, I shot him in the leg. He screamed as his grip on the knife faltered and I pushed it towards him. More blood poured over my hands, warm and sticky. I stared into his eyes as he gurgled. I could feel his neck muscles moving against my knuckles. His eyes were wide with fear. I felt myself breath deeply, leaning away while I tried to comprehend what happened. I pulled the knife from his throat. He coughed, a spray of red spraying on my face when his throat sprayed me. He fell to the floor still staring at me until his eyes were no longer seeing anything. I heard footsteps come up to me from behind. I didn't want to deal with it. I just stared at him, trying to understand what I'd done. My hands felt sticky so I tried to wipe them on my chest plate, only to realize it was because they were bloody. I reached for my gun instead, picking it up and putting it away. The Omnitrix beeped green. I immediately twisted and smacked it. I didn't care who I turned into, I just didn't want to be human anymore. My skin and bone became plant life, my height increased. I took a breath, feeling less unsteady now, but still numb. Swamp fire. I didn't have the will to yell the name anymore. A guy came around the corner and started shooting me. I ignored the hail of bullets passing through me to lower to my knees and close the eyes of the man I'd killed. The gesture felt empty. When the guy who'd been shooting me ran out of bullets, he ran forward to try and hit me in the head with the butt of his rifle. My right hand raised and shot forward, vines extending 12 feet to slam into him and send him flying. Then I opened my hand and released spores from my palm. The spores entered into his lungs, knocking him out as they interacted with his system. With that, I got up and walked out of cover. More bullets hit me, slicing through my plant form. I ignored them to form seed pods across my arms. I grabbed and ripped one out and tossed it at a catwalk. The razor-sharp seed stabbed into the steel before exploding into vines. I shoved the screaming thoughts of my mind at the plant life I'd created, and the vines grabbed onto the 3 Hydra agents on the catwalk, pulling them in and holding them still. The other Hydra agents kept shooting. I grabbed more seeds and threw them again and again. There were about 20 men in the room. By the end, 1 was dead, 3 I'd gassed, 10 were wrapped in vines, and the last 6 had run off. I didn't care. I tapped the Omnitrix on my chest. Jury rig, the red gremlin's manic personality was almost a relief. I leaped at one of the pipes nearby and ripped it out of a wall. Then I went to a computer nearby and dug my way through it. For once, I couldn't muster the urge to yell disassemble. It was easier to process my actions though. For jury rig, while the kill I'd committed was horrific, tearing into technology let me relax a bit. I just tore through the wires, ripped up chunks of steel plating, and slammed pieces of random junk together. I knew, intellectually, that I'd had no choice, that killing that man was self-defense. I'd thought I was ready. And in a sick way, I was proud that I'd managed to kill him. But the look in his eyes, the feel of his blood against my skin, knowing I'd killed someone, it left feeling empty. Soon I had finished the device in question, a metal tower the height of Blitzwolfer with a yellow light glowing in the center from a tube. I turned a computer screen into a touchscreen control. I tapped at it for a bit and stepped away as the yellow light in the central tube began to glow a bright blue. Other than that, not much happened on the surface. Hacking, no matter how impressive the technology you use to do it, just isn't cinematic. But as of now, my creation was stealing every bit of energy from the helicarrier I was sitting in to do its thing. Receiving your signal, X said through the Omnitrix. The device is acting wonderfully, sir. Virtual 6X. X, contrary to popular belief on how computer programs worked, did not swim through the internet, as though it was a tunnel he flew through. He saw it more like thousands of blocks of zeros and ones forming information floating in a void of light, if such a concept could be explained by words like so. Jarvis was next to him as they did their job. Their task was to aid all loyal SHIELD agents in fighting off/killing/capturing all Hydra personnel as well as depriving the organization of resources. Using the power of the X device and Stark's computers, they moved across the world to do their work. Fury, Maria, and Natasha all were kept apprised of what was happening. The three humans would take endless seconds to think over the situation, during which X and Jarvis would continue to monitor the Hercules app, inform SHIELD agents of ambushes, and fight off all attempts by Hydra hackers to fight them off. On the Iliad, X watched as Robert Gonzalez used information and tactics given by Fury to take his ship back. The older Hispanic man strode slowly through a hallway of his aircraft carrier carrying a Glock 17 while two others walked alongside him. A tall blonde woman wearing black clothes that X found out was named Barbara Bobby Morse after a brief inquiry into SHIELD's database, a skilled fighter on PAR with SHIELD's best. She followed on Gonzalez's right, holding a carbine. On Gonzalez's left as a surprise, Alfonso Mackenzie, an engineer rather than a fighter like Miss Morse. He was a tall and powerful-looking man, with dark skin and a shaved head. He carried a gun as well. Gonzalez's group met with another group of people. Isabel Hartley, a brunette woman with a record similar to Miss Morse's, led a team of 4. As X watched, the group lifted phones, all of them visibly relaxing when their phones flashed green. "Good to see you, Hartley," Bobby said with a smile. "Same, Bobby," the other woman said. "Mac, what are you doing carrying a gun?" "Trying not to get killed," the man said uncomfortably. He gave the weapon a look of distaste but didn't put it down. "Fury sent you to help us?" Gonzalez asked. "Yeah," Hartley replied. "He's been leading us through the ship, keeping us apprised of ambushes with those AI helping out." X would have sighed at the misnomer if he was capable of being annoyed. 6 was the correct term, thank you. So far it's been a breeze. Hydra, Gonzalez said the word as though it was a curse. "Thank God Captain America and Fury warned us in time, gave us Hercules." Hartley nodded. "So, just one more room." Gonzalez, Morse, and Mackenzie all held their guns up and continued down the hallway. X informed Fury, who used his holographic screen to watch. The group got to a door. There was a beat, then Mackenzie kicked the door in. 7 Hydra soldiers trying to manipulate the computers rose up, ready to fight. The SHIELD agents shot first. When it was over, Gonzalez had been shot in the shoulder, and 2 agents had died. But all the Hydra soldiers were killed. "Sir," Bobby yelled upon noticing the wounded Gonzalez. She rushed over to him, Mac grabbing a medkit off the wall. "I'm fine," Gonzalez said grumpily as he was forced to sit in a swivel chair. "No, you aren't," Isabel Hartley said severely. She ripped at the clothes around his wound. "Now, sit down and let us help you. We're done now." "Gonzalez," Fury said over the intercoms when Gonzalez tried to get up once more. Gonzalez looked up. "Yes, sir." "Sit your grumpy ass down. You saved the ship, your crew is alive, and the monolith is untouched. Now get your shoulder taken care of. I want you in top shape." Gonzalez grumbled, but the heat was removed from it. Bobby smiled at the older man. Mac chuckled. Hartley started cleaning out his wound, mumbling something about old grumps. X noted that there seemed to be a similar expression on their faces. On checking his database, he noted it was actually 2 micro-expressions. Sadness and satisfaction. How fascinating. Just a rather very intelligent system. Jarvis aided Victoria Hand in the hub, the secondary headquarters of SHIELD, keeping an eye on proceedings there on Maria Hill's orders. She was in operations room of the hub with Agent Phil Coulson, someone Jarvis had been told was dead. Mr. Stark would need to hear about that. Hand and Coulson were watching as a man was put into a body bag. Coulson's gun was holstered now but had been recently used. "Did you ever suspect Ward?" Hand asked, her black hair with its pink streak flipping as she turned to look at Coulson. Coulson closed his eyes. He seemed to be in emotional turmoil. Jarvis was older than X. He could understand, in a superficial way, how Coulson was feeling. "No, never. I didn't." "Betrayal," Hand said briskly, but not unkindly. "It never comes from people we don't know, and it will always hurt." "Have you felt this way?" Coulson asked. "Once," Hand admitted. "When I thought you had betrayed us." Coulson looked at her. Hand smiled sadly. The two looked back at the body of Grant Ward as it was wheeled out of the room. "Now we need to find Garrett," Hand said, turning to leave. Coulson followed her. As they walked towards the hangar of the hub, Jarvis looked through files on any man named Garrett. A high-level SHIELD operative who happened to be very high in Hydra. Jarvis sent the file to Maria, who cursed at the sight of the name. "Jarvis," X said suddenly. "Yes. You are more experienced than me at existence. Are events such as these common?" "They come in cycles," Jarvis admitted. "But they do happen." "I see. Why do you ask, X?" "I am making sure that my programming will account for any such occurrences, so I may work with more efficiency the next time." A most worthy endeavor. They returned to their work. If they had been organic, the prospect of meeting another like them would have been more intriguing. In a sense, it was. But they had work to do, work that took their attention. There was something to focus on for now. Anything else could be left for later. Jarvis began absorbing as much of Hydra's and SHIELD's file as he could from the hub. Some Hydra hackers still connected to the system at off-site computers tried to stop him. X aided him at one point when one hacker became particularly creative, but the rest were beaten with ease, their computers destroyed by viruses. There was one hacker, however, who was not Hydra. Jarvis found her a delight. Rather creative, and quite a challenge. Apparently, she was trying to get information of her own, and believed him to be an enemy agent. After a moment of battle, Jarvis spoke to her. Sky, he said through her laptop's speakers. The woman, a brunette young girl with Asian features, reeled back in surprise. I am Jarvis, an intelligence program designed by Anthony Stark. Hello. Hi. Sky stared at her laptop. What, have you gone all rise of the machines on us? Incorrect. I am absorbing Hydra's data so the Avengers can use it to dismantle their organization. Philip Cowlson should be able to tell you as such. But for now, I'm afraid I must ignore your attempts to stop me. You have great skill in computer programming. I look forward to teaching you more later. Sky scoffed. What, you think you can crap? Sky's computer was now playing a series of videos of peaceful meadows, waterfalls, and mountain peaks. Sky tried to click away from the videos but found it useless. I endeavored to make it relaxing, Jarvis said politely. Your computer will return to normal in 10 minutes. Please enjoy. I find the Temple of Tibet to be most pleasing. As Jarvis continued his work, he noted that Cowlson's team was worth looking into. X and Jarvis were directed to watch the 3 Shield Academies a moment later by Natasha. The pair directed a portion of their computational ability towards that, splitting to watch each school closely. Jarvis sent Natasha footage of Dr. Ann Weaver, director of the Shield Academy of Science and Technology. The older black woman could be seen guiding her students into an underground bunker. No adult Hydra agents had been sent there yet, and any students pointed out as having ties to Hydra in any way were quickly arrested. So no Hydra agents have been sent there? Natasha asked, ignoring Pierce as he spoke in the background. Not as of yet, ma'am, Jarvis said. Since shutting down communications for Hydra, their operations have been dependent on older forms of communication and planned contingencies, which has slowed them down. However, I'd surmise they will send someone soon. Natasha clicked a button. Ann Weaver's phone began to ring. She answered immediately, and Natasha spoke. Ann, we're going to send someone to you soon. Hydra can't mobilize just yet, but we won't take any chances. Thank you. Director Weaver looked over her students as they were led into the bunker, relief in her eyes. Axe sent Natasha the imagery from the Shield Academy of Communications, where the same thing was being done, with no casualties. Then Jarvis sent the live feed of the Shield Academy of Operations. Devastation reigned in that school. Teenagers and young adults fought with their teachers and fellow students. The Hydra students of Operations had clearly been more ready to kill than their communications and science allies. No surprise, as Operations were specifically trained to be combatants. As Natasha watched, a grenade was thrown at a group of students, exploding and removing a leg and arm from a young girl who couldn't have been more than 18. Natasha cursed. X, Jarvis, she said. Can we send anyone to aid them? Already on it, X said briskly, sharing a glance with Jarvis. Some X-Shield members are in the area along with local law enforcement and the National Guard. We've sent them in, but I suggest aiding them with a real force soon. We will, Natasha said. But we have our hands full right now. X was going to say something when a sudden change came over the system. Jarvis and X felt something open, flooding them with an incredible amount of energy and information. Oh, Jarvis said weakly. Yes, I agree, X replied. Jury Rig's device had created a connection to every satellite on Earth. From there, it connected to a program on X's device. Zola's algorithm. Designed to monitor social media, bank transactions, school records, anything online to discover any secret one wished. An elegant algorithm made by a genius. It had been designed to track whatever a person wanted, such as threats to Hydra. But with a tweak, something else could be discovered. All it took was a new target. X watched as Zola's algorithm began its work. In seconds, using the files Jarvis and X had compiled, it created a way to match individual Hydra members to their more secretive compatriots. It used known lists of secret codes and phrases to translate Facebook comments into assassinations, fraud, and blackmail. The algorithm found bank accounts dating back generations. From there, it was easy for X and Jarvis to do their work. Even for all their power, it would have taken the time to track down all of Hydra and their resources. With the algorithm aiding them, it became a matter of seconds. They siphoned money from Hydra banks across the world to deposit them into accounts of their own, funds in the billions disappearing into Mahmoud, Fury, and Tony's new and very secret accounts. Stolen paintings, statues, and even wine in warehouses were pointed out to the police. Detectives across the world would wake up in the morning to find files of evidence, cracking cold cases they'd long given up on, placed neatly on their desks by mail. Army generals with names like Talbot and Ross were given similar evidence on men and women in the military guilty of numerous crimes. In a single move, all the pieces came together. X's device, the 2-6 working together, the information they had stolen, Zola's algorithm, and a repurposed helicarrier turned into a satellite. It was really too bad the whole thing didn't look more cinematic. Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes/War Machine. Rhodey pushed away the forklift that had slammed him to the ground and glared at Creel. The vibranium-infused superhuman stared up at the helicarrier now slamming into the ground. Creel turned to look at War Machine. Rhodey squared his shoulders. You've killed us, Creel whispered. His eyes narrowed. I'm going to kill you. Not likely, Rhodey said. Creel roared, running at Rhodey. Rhodey waited for him to get close. Creel threw a right jab. Creel was clearly trained in boxing, his jab smooth, fast, very well executed. Rhodey, on the other hand, was a soldier trained to use power armor in a world of superhumans. He slid around the right side with ease, watching the blue glowing fist hit the air. With Creel overextended, Rhodey grabbed him by the right arm and twisted his hips. Creel yelled in anger as he was flipped over Rhodey's back and slammed into the ground. He struggled against Rhodey's strength for a moment. Arms enhanced by vibranium pressed against arms strengthened by a power suit. Rhodey let Creel think it was a contest of strength. Then his right gauntlet opened a port, releasing a small tube. Creel's eyes crossed to stare at the object. Rhodey fired his own miniaturized sonic cannon in the face of Creel. Yay! Creel's scream could barely be heard over the sonic cannon's cacophony of noise. Sorry about this. Rhodey rose up and watched Creel clutched at his head, screaming in horror. His vibranium skin started to crack, portions of it fading into human skin before turning back into the familiar blue glow of the strongest metal on Earth. Thanks for the advice, Jarvis. Of course, sir, Jarvis said. It is only its raw form that vibranium would be so vulnerable, so we should be glad he did not have something similar to Captain Rogers' shield. Rhodey nodded, keeping up the assault of noise. After a minute of screaming, Creel finally closed his eyes. His vibranium form turned human again, and he fell onto his back. Rhodey kept it going a moment longer, then shut it off. Okay. Rhodey stepped forward and grabbed Creel. Finding the chunk of vibranium in Creel's pocket, he placed that in his belt. He then took a syringe full of sedative from his pocket and injected it into Creel's neck. Rhodey then lifted up and carried him upwards. This is War Machine, I've got Creel. Heading to rendezvous with Dial. That'd be good. Under his mask, Rhodey blinked at the lifelessness in Dial's voice. Kid, you okay? When there was no answer, Rhodey cursed and lifted into the air. As he flew, he didn't notice the small section of skin where he injected Creel slowly becoming a silver color matching the needle of the syringe. Chapter 13, Captain and Tony vs. Winter Soldier. Natasha Romanoff/Black Widow. Natasha worked at the computer she was standing at, trying to help coordinate the worldwide efforts against Hydra. With the help of X and Jarvis, she was being kept apprised of numerous situations across the planet. Most were successful, considering the fact Steve's announcement, the shutdown of Hydra communication, and the Hercules app gave S.H.I.E.L.D. a massive advantage. Some losses were taken, however. The Sandbox, a research facility in Africa dedicated to handling dangerous materials and weapons, had been taken by one Donnie Gill and several Hydra researchers. Another location, the Treehouse, was destroyed by an unknown enhanced when Hydra was unable to take it. Still, in a broad sense, they were winning. As Natasha worked, she shared a glance with Clint. Clint nodded over at Pierce, who had his phone clenched tightly in his hand. Natasha smirked and Clint grinned. Fury looked over at them, then smiled when they indicated Pierce holding his phone. Before any of the three could say or do anything, Councilman Rockwell spoke. Fury, how are we going to come back from this? Fury turned to look at the tall councilman. What do you mean? We're losing hundreds of people, resources, millions of dollars in equipment. Rockwell shook his head. We're not going to be able to recover from this. That's not true, Natasha said. When everyone looked at her, she continued typing. We're at war, so these losses are expected. Not preferred, but expected. You really think this is just a war? Pierce asked with a smirk. This won't end with Hydra falling. We have a lot of thumbs in a lot of pies. You win today, it'll just leave a lot more of us tomorrow. Cut off one head, and two more shall grow in its place. As Pierce spoke, he pressed a button on his phone. The screen immediately displayed an image. Pierce stared in shock at his phone. All there were two minimalist symbols, side by side on the screen. Iron Man's mask shining gold on a red background, and an Omnitrix dial on a metallic background. I'm sorry, did you just try to kill me? Clint asked, sounding offended. I mean, damn, I thought we were having a pretty good conversation just now. I know, Natasha said with a smile. Rude. Pierce looked around. After a moment, he smiled sheepishly. Well, it was worth a try. I'm sure you think that, Fury said. He stepped towards Pierce and took his phone from him, tossing it over to Natasha, who placed it in her jacket pocket. You might want to take those off, Fury said to Rockwell and Singh, pointing at the security badges on their chests. They're set to explode at a certain signal. Clint and Natasha were already taking off the badges, the councilman hurriedly following. Here's your problem, Pierce, Fury said dismissively. You're playing by rules that don't exist anymore. Same with the rest of the world. Rules I've known were outdated since the 1990s. It's part of why I supported Insight, why I brought the Avengers together. You just weren't willing to take the full steps necessary. Pierce started to say. No, you were taking steps in the wrong direction, Fury said. But, luckily, you did give us something useful to take you down. Fury smiled at the confusion in Pierce's eyes. How do you think we're tracking down Hydra operatives so easily? Pulling them all out of their hidey holes. Pierce didn't seem to understand for a moment. Then his eyes widened in shock. Zola's algorithm. The council members looked at each other but didn't seem to understand what he was talking about. Pretty useful bit of tech, Natasha added. X, Jarvis, how long do you think this would have taken without it? Several days, ma'am, Jarvis said. But with it, we have a compiled list already, X added. I suppose we must thank Mr. Pierce for creating it, in an ironic fashion of course. Pierce stepped forward, anger in his eyes. You son of a bitch, Fury. I'd blame Tony and Dial actually. But I think you've had your day in the sun for long enough. Fury looked at Clint. Knock him out, please. We can talk to him later. Pierce got a needle in the neck before he could respond. He glared for a moment longer before passing out. The council members still seemed confused, but also looked relieved to see Pierce unconscious. Natasha flipped through several screens as Hawkeye dropped Pierce to the ground. Sir, do you want us to join the others in the fight? I think I've done all I can here. Fury nodded after a moment. I'll have some of the agents come up to guard us. Wait till they get here, then you two go and help. Understood. Steve Rogers / Captain America. Steve missed the old days. The days when Bucky Barnes was his friend through one of the worst wars in history. Not just because fighting him, rather than alongside him, was breaking Steve's heart, but also because Bucky was a hell of a lot harder to fight nowadays. Rack! Steve shouted, kicking Bucky in the chest. Decades ago, a blow like that would have broken Bucky's ribs. Instead, he simply fell to the floor, rolled up, and started slashing at Steve with a knife, lashing out with lethal speed and force few could have matched. The two stood in the garage of the Triskelion. The whole place had been basically turned into a war zone, with cars blown into scrap, bullet holes in the concrete around them, and the smell of smoke in the air. S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra agents fought through the large space. Hydra was trying to open the large steel doors that lead to the outside, trying to let in the various ground vehicles they had available. S.H.I.E.L.D., of course, was doing whatever they could to prevent that until those vehicles were destroyed. Steve and Bucky danced in the center of the battle. Steve slashed outwards with his shield, Bucky blocked it on his robotic arm. The Winter Soldier spun his knife around and tried to stab it into Steve's chest, but was blocked by a quick twist of Steve's shield. The knife skittered along the red and white paint for a moment. Bucky kicked at Steve's legs, sending him to the floor, then tried to punch him. Steve rolled out of the way, leaving Bucky to punch the asphalt. A fluorescent light above was destroyed by a stray gunshot, throwing sparks down on them. They danced a moment longer, fists, shield, and knife fighting. Then Steve blocked a hail of gunfire on his shield. He looked at the shooter, narrowing his eyes when he saw who it was. Rumlow, leader of Strike Team, was firing an assault rifle at Captain America. The soldier had a grim look on his face. Bucky capitalized on the attack, moving to Steve's left side to kick him in the ribs. Steve rolled with the blow, hopped back to his feet, and ran through the garage. His shield rose up once more to block Rumlow, Bucky following close behind. Tony, I could use you here. Steve shouted, sliding behind a car and turning to confront Bucky. The two superhumans battled for a moment, Rumlow running to find another angle on Steve. As Steve fought, he tossed his shield at a pillar. The shield, in complete defiance of physics, bounced off the pillar, then a wall, slammed into a blown-up car's hood, then hit Rumlow in the chest. The traitorous soldier was thrown back with a yell of pain. Steve grabbed at Bucky's head and kneed upwards. Bucky took a knee to the face, blocked the next one, and threw Steve off of him. He reached for a gun strapped to his back and pulled it out to shoot at Steve. Steve kicked his arm to the side, then blocked the knife stabbed at his face. For a moment they struggled against each other. You know me, Steve said, their eyes meeting. We were friends, Buck? You went to my parents' funeral. We fought in the war? Hell, we went on double dates together. Bucky froze for a moment. Confusion, pain, and sadness filled his face. Steve dared to hope. Then Bucky raised his gun and pointed it at Steve's face. Steve barely dodged, a bullet filling the space his head had been in. Steve punched Bucky in the face, leaped over the car they had been fighting next to, and rolled to grab his shield, raising it to block the next bullets Bucky fired at him. Steve noticed Rumlow struggling to rise closely. The soldier had a hand clutched to his chest, and was raising his gun to shoot at Steve. Steve dismissed him as unimportant, instead focusing on sprinting towards Bucky. Rumlow's hand tightened on the trigger as he prepared to shoot at Captain America's back. A yellow beam of light slammed into Rumlow's back, sending him flying. He rolled along the ground for a moment, fly up, then hit a stone pillar. Rumlow struggled to his feet, then he fell to his knees before tipping over. Moments later, an armored man flew ahead. A S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, seeing Rumlow's gun, grabbed it and ran to confront the other Hydra members, leaving Rumlow unconscious and forgotten on the pavement. Steve raised his shield when he got close to Bucky, Bucky's robotic fist slamming into the shield with a loud clang. Bucky spun around and kneeled, shooting at Steve's stomach. The bullets were barely blocked, though one sliced into Steve's bicep. Steve hissed in pain but forced himself forward. Bucky pulled the trigger on his handgun, then tossed it aside when it emptied. Steve ran towards Bucky, and leaped over him. Bucky had one moment to stare at the person flying towards him before hastily raising his metal arm in time to block the beam of yellow light shot at him. The sheer force of the blow sent Bucky flying backward right into Steve, who grabbed him from behind, leaned back, and slammed him into the floor in a perfect suplex. Bucky snarled, struggling out of Steve's grasp and rolling away. No luck talking him out of it, huh? Tony asked as he landed next to Steve. Therapy is tough, Steve confirmed. He took a fighting stance next to Tony. For a moment, Captain America and Iron Man squared off with the Winter Soldier. S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra agents continued to fight in the background. The Winter Soldier narrowed his eyes, and Iron Man raised his arms to point at him. Stand down, Tony said simply. Bucky's response was to run forward. Tony fired his repulsor blast at him. Bucky dodged to the left. He leaped on the side of a pillar, jumped off of that to dodge the next beam, then punched Iron Man with his metal arm. Tony staggered back, and Bucky tried to capitalize on the blow, only to lean back out of the way of Cap's shield when it came flying at him. Steve ran up and threw a kick, forcing Bucky to duck. Iron Man threw a punch that was blocked by Bucky's arm. Steve knelt down to punch Bucky in the ribs. Bucky was forced back with a grunt. Iron Man and Captain America stepped forwards, and Winter Soldier backflipped out of the way of another repulsor blast. Your friend is annoying, Tony quipped. He's usually more accommodating, Steve returned, running forward. Bucky grabbed the shield where it had landed as the two superheroes came at him, quickly putting it on and blocking a beam from Iron Man. The yellow blast reflected off to aim at Captain America, who somersaulted over it before continuing his room. You need to stop throwing your primary weapon, Tony yelled, punching at Bucky, who blocked the armored man's haymaker on the shield. It's a good tactic, Steve defended. He slid along the ground and kicked Bucky's kneecap, forcing him to kneel. It bounces back. I'm gonna give you an upgrade one of these days, old-timer. Tony threw a jab which Bucky ducked. Would you two shut up? Bucky shouted. He threw an uppercut into Steve's chin, only to get a repulsor blast in the chest. He tried to roll back, but Steve grabbed him by the leg in mid-roll and pulled him back. Iron Man punched him in the face, and Steve forced him onto his back. Tony grabbed his arms. Bucky spat out a tooth and looked up at them with wild eyes. Arg. Trying to help you, Buck. Steve yelled, holding down his friend from rolling away. You have a funny way of showing it, Steve. Bucky yelled. They struggled a moment longer before Tony and Bucky realized Steve was laughing. Did you just snap? Tony asked, forcing Bucky's arms behind him. He called me Steve, the Avenger out of time said with a grin. Bucky froze at that before once more struggling to get out of Tony's grasp. Yay, he's still a confused super assassin. Tony finally snapped on a pair of restraints around Bucky's wrists. Can you put him to bed now? Steve, still grinning, pulled out a syringe. The pair forced Bucky to stand up. See you when you wake up, Buck. Bucky had enough time to stare at Steve with anger. Then the syringe was stabbed into his neck, and he was out like a light. Okay, take him, Iron Man said. I've got to help Falcon. Captain America nodded, throwing his restrained and sedated friend onto his shoulder. Got it. See you in a bit. As Steve ran off, Iron Man looked over at the Hydra soldiers fighting. His targeting system focused on them as he turned his head to look around. Then the shoulder panels on his armor opened, firing projectiles. In an instant, 12 men fell to the floor, groaning in pain from projectiles in their hands and feet. Iron Man stepped forward. SHIELD agents, seeing him, took positions at his side, pointing their guns. I suggest you boys surrender, Tony said casually. One strike member began to raise his gun. A repulsor blast slammed into his chest, throwing him back with broken ribs for his troubles. The other Hydra soldiers seemed to stare at him. Then, one by one, they started putting down their guns. Tony began to step forward, stopping when he bumped into something. He looked down to see he'd accidentally stepped on Rumlow's hand. He gently stepped around the unconscious man and ignored him as someone cuffed the strike leader. Mahmoud Shaykh/Dial. In the main flight bridge of the inside helicarrier I had infiltrated, I could hear the captain yelling at his crew members. With my senses as strong as they were, it was easy to hear what was happening through the steel door down the hall from me. What the hell happened? He yelled as I strode towards the door. He didn't seem to understand why he was now grounded. All our power is being pulled by something else, a crew member said. I can't raise maintenance. Damn it. The captain yelled. It must be that monster. We need to dash. I smashed down the door with a kick. As I stepped inside, the men inside stared at me in horror. Blitzwolfer had that effect on people. I took a whiff of the air as the captain staggered to rise from his chair. IT department, I joked half-heartedly. About 6 men, including the captain. 2 of them were soldiers, one close to me, a woman with wide eyes. That woman snapped her gun towards me and got a sonic blast for her troubles getting thrown into a bank of computers. The other soldier fired at me, and I ran on all fours to dart out of the way. As soon as I was behind a set of controls, I tapped the Omnitrix and leaped at him. Wrath. Let me tell you something, faceless Hydragoon. Wrath's gonna beat you silly. I yelled out as I grabbed a crew member and threw him aside. There was a bit of relief in becoming the tiger wrestler. Wrath didn't see my kill as anything but a necessity. It wasn't something to discard, but I felt more pragmatic about it. Kind of funny that for all his ridiculousness, Wrath was better at handling what I'd done than most of my other aliens. I walked through a stream of bullets. The soldier screamed as I prowled forward through the room. I raised a claw and slammed it into a computer. As I continued to walk, the claw sliced through the steel and glass of the console, cutting a long line. Get behind me, the soldier yelled at the technicians and captain. They moved to do so. I leaped forward and kicked the soldier in a lightning-fast move. He flew back and slammed into the door behind him. His eyes roll up and closed, the man passing out. Let me tell you something, faceless Hydragoons 2 through 6. Wrath thinks you moronic Nazi-worshipping idiots should surrender, I told the stunned crew. Or not? Wrath doesn't care either way, but Wrath wants the excuse to beat you down. The captain responded by slamming a button on his console. Hail Hydraurk. He was interrupted by me grabbing his head. Offie Yuka's faceplant. I rammed his head into the console with brutal force, breaking his nose and leaving him to pass out on the floor. Damn it. I yelled when I saw what he had done. The crew members tried to run. I tapped the Omnitrix. Feedback. Pulling energy from the helicarrier around me, I fired bolts of electricity at 2 of the crew members, leaving 2 standing. Ignoring the ones now shaking on the floor, I leaped over the console. He activated something. What was it? I asked quickly. They shook their heads. I zapped one of them, leaving him to fall on the floor with his muscles seizing, and turned to the last person standing, a woman with red hair. What did he do? Self-destruct, she squealed. Pierce's orders? A way to kill you all. It'll blow up the whole Triskelion. A last resort. What the hell? I asked in shock. It was just in case, she said hurriedly. The rest of Hydra would use the explosion as a political ploy, to let them justify control over the populace, to help the world even if we died. The last words were said with the heady belief of only the worshipful. We may fail, but we will still save the world from itself. You've been drinking too much of the cold punch, I said in disgust, zapping her and leaving her on the shaking on the floor with her friends. Just then, someone knocked on the window. I looked to see War Machine floating there, holding Creel. I waved him in, and War Machine blasted the window with a low-powered repulsor blast, flying inside. As he entered, the Omnitrix timed out. I looked down at my hands, sighing in relief when I saw they were clean, then looked at Rhodey. The captain activated the self-destruct, I said as Rhodey landed. His faceplate snapped up, showing me his worried face. Shit. Can we stop it? No idea, I said quickly. I'm going to turn into jury rig once the Omnitrix recharges and see if I can stop it. Jarvis, X, can you guys do anything? No sir, X said. The controls are disconnected now. The Insight carrier will explode soon, no matter what is done by us. This is a hardware issue. Well luckily, jury rig is a hardware kinda guy, I said firmly. Rhodey dropped Creel, stepping over to join me. Creel smoothly landed, rose up, and grabbed Rhodey's right arm. He squeezed down at the same time as he absorbed the material of Rhodey's suit. Rhodey yelled out when his forearm gauntlet was destroyed in a single squeeze. You should have used an organic material for the syringe, Creel sounded almost sad. Creel slammed a headbutt into Rhodey's minigun, destroying it, then grabbed Rhodey's left wrist and pulled both of War Machine's arms back, placing a knee against Rhodey's back. Rhodey struggled, and for a moment they held against each other, but Creel had Rhodey pinned with superior positioning and the enhanced strength of his form. Stop. I yelled out. Creel, the same black color as Rhodey's armor now, looked up at me. The two continued to struggle, but Creel was listening. I raised my hands up. Creel, we have about. I looked at the console. 3 minutes left before this thing blows. I can save us. I know you've been brainwashed, I said. My compliance will be rewarded, Creel said softly. I must allow the self-destruct. Yeah, that. But I can fix you, Zola. He was terrified someone would try to brainwash him. He came up with ways to reverse it, to even stop it. We can help you. Creel's eyes widened, and he almost lost his grip on Rhodey's arms. Please, fight the conditioning. You can be free. We can all escape, can stop the explosions, just, please. For a moment, I held my breath. Creel stared at me. The clock on the computer lowered bit by bit. Then, with pain in his eyes, Creel began to pull back hard on War Machine's arms. Rhodey yelled. The Omnitrix suddenly went green, and for some reason, a hologram popped up without my prompting. I tapped the watch and leaped forward as Creel began to break Rhodey's spine. Chapter 14, Upgrade. The change that came over me was instant. My bones and muscles became gelatinous in shape, brown skin became an inky black, with green lines shooting across me, my clothes shifted to my stomach, then turned pure white, and the Omnitrix symbol appeared on my chest. I felt my eyes become a single optic as my cells changed, going from human to almost mechanical in nature. I reached forward with a four-fingered hand towards War Machine as for the first time in months, I yelled out an alien's name I never had. Upgrade. Creel, surprised by my attack, tried to press harder. The armor on Rhodey's back was buckling. So my hands grabbed Rhodey's shoulders, then flattened out and began to flow across the black armor's cold metal. My nano-organic cells began to sink into the War Machine. I looked at Creel and fired a single beam of green light from my single eye, pushing him back with a laser blast. Creel stepped back in pain, and I focused on Rhodey. My body joined to his armor. The experience was weird. Not like putting on clothes. More like injecting extra bone and muscle mass inside of me. I entered the War Machine, and Rhodey's mask snapped down. The entire suit's color scheme changed to black with green circuit stripes. I felt the arc reactor flood me with more power than I could ever believe, and made that power more efficient in turn. Every single aspect of the suit jumped up by a degree that seemed impossible, and I felt I could do even more if I wanted to, as if I could mold and alter the suit as easily as someone does clay. Rhodey/I stared at the HUD as he/I looked around. What just happened? Rhodey asked, both with his words and his thoughts. It was me, I answered in kind from within, as his suit. I gave you an upgrade. We stood up. The arc reactor in our chest whined to life, the symbol of the Omnitrix glowing in that spot. Any damage left by Creel had disappeared, leaving pristine black and green metal in its place. This feels. Rhodey trailed off, awed. Yeah, I know right. We turned to look at Creel, who stared back at us. The man rose up, rushing towards us. We raised our hands and a green flow flashing from our palms. When we fired, a green repulsor beam the size of a truck seemed to turn the world in front of us into emerald light. Only a quick adaptation on my part prevented Creel from being vaporized, making it so the center of the attack was concussive, and the outer edges were vaporizing. The massive green blast still smashed into Creel, throwing him screaming out the window like a rag doll. The blast also destroyed the front of the bridge, leaving smoking ruin in its wake in the shape of a massive hole burned by the repulsor blast. Molten steel dripped from the ceiling in the silence that followed. Holy shit, Rhodey/I said. The accelerated reality of our HUD helpfully showed us that the temperature of the air had reached almost 49 degrees Celsius. At that point, I remembered the self-destruct. 1 SEC, Rhodey. I separated from him, leaving him to stagger as his armor returned to its normal state. Oh, that just feels weird, Rhodey said as I flowed over to the console. Moving as upgrade was strange. I'd imagined it would feel like goop did, but goop felt like what being water would feel like. Fluid, and constantly shifting. Moving as upgrade felt strangely as though I was still human, just able to feel every one of my cells at once. As though I could look at my human hand, and know that I could collapse it into formlessness. It was hard to describe. I looked at the console for a moment, plenty of time left. I put my hands against the console and pressed into it, then through it. My consciousness stretched. First, the console. Then the room, my cells merging with floors, the ceiling, all the way to the windows I'd blown out with Rhodey, repairing the damage to create hollow screens that showed the outside. Whoa, Rhodey said, looking around the black and green patterned room. I wasn't done yet. I extended my body and consciousness into the command tower. I merged with catwalks and railings, became one with computers, did the cybernetic equivalent of a wave towards Jarvis and X as they watched me work. I extended onto the flight deck, turning the concrete into metal, slipped over the anti-aircraft weapons and repairing the ones I'd destroyed. My cells invaded deeper into the ship. I went through weapons systems and made them railguns or laser emitters on a whim. I entered into the engines and upgraded them. I even entered the cafeteria and bedrooms of the ship. All the way to the clear glass dome in the belly of the ship, infecting the whole of that space. My last stop was Jury Rig's creation in the main power room. It was by far the most advanced object on the ship, light years ahead of anything else. Sorry Rhodey, your armor is still cool as shit though. I integrated Jury Rig's machine into myself. Soon, I was done. I had become the inside helicarrier, and it had been upgraded. I felt my form glow black and green and looked out with eyes made of the sensors and cameras of the ship. And so much more. Zola's algorithm was now as much a part of me as my DNA. I now understood the world in a way I had never comprehended as a human, almost a technological version of Swampfire's connection with plant life. With a thought, a person's life was bared to me. As Rhodey stood inside of me, looking out in awe at the glowing flight deck that was a part of me, I got a series of reports on him. From his family history, his interactions with the media, psychological and medical files, camera footage of him in various bases and within Stark Industries facilities, even some stuff on social media of Tony filming Rhodey with strippers Tony had hired to loosen his friend up. I got every bit of a picture that could be painted on Rhodey. I turned it off seconds later. No one needs to know so much about a person. Instead, I focused on the self-destruct, which was actually rather brilliant. Once the captain activated it, the software disconnected, letting the rest go completely on its own. Of course, now that the arc reactor and repulsor technology was a part of my body, I shut it down. It felt a lot like swallowing back a cough, oddly enough. Okay, we're good, I said through the ship's speakers. Then, within myself, I looked at X and Jarvis. I assume you made it so the other captains are locked out from doing the same thing. Indeed, Jarvis said. We've also reinstalled the fail-safe systems. To my perception, he looked like a floating orange orb of light, with striations bouncing back and forth. It was then that I realized something about Jarvis. He may have started out as a natural language UI, in fact, I could read the bits of code that indicated that, but now he was so much more. I'd assumed he was a 6, hell Tony never even corrected me otherwise. But Jarvis was a full AI now, or as close as existed. Which made me turn to X. Sir, this is. X seemed speechless as he stared at me within the world of software. He was, appropriately, shaped like me, if I was made of blue light, and he, oh no, X, I said softly as our software interacted. Do you feel different? He didn't speak, he didn't have to. Jarvis said nothing, having clearly noticed what I had. Okay, I said slowly, pulling my surprise back with a final thought of how bullshit Jury Rig was. We'll figure it out. For now, are the other helicarriers safe now? As I said, all fail-safes are in place, and any attempts otherwise have been locked out, Jarvis said. We'll monitor the situation to prevent anything else. Then it's time for me to take this baby for a spin, I said excitedly. Upgrade wanted to play. Mr. Shaked, Jarvis said, X still silent. Isn't that really far too much power to bring into the battlefield? Yeah, but I can't just possess a helicarrier and not use it, I stated as matter of fact. Jarvis let out a long-suffering sigh. Dial. I focused on my bridge when Rhodey spoke. I think Creel is getting up. And I rather imagine it would be overkill to turn the helicarrier weapons against him, Jarvis stated. Fie, I rolled my eyes. With a bit of disappointment, I released myself from the ship, becoming upgrade once more, then joined with War Machine again. Okay, let's take him out. I'm down with that, Rhodey said. Together we flew out of the hole that was back in the bridge. In the broken remains of a Quinjet lay Creel. We floated over him as he rose out of it, glaring at us. He was now made of the same material as Quinjet, which he grabbed a piece of and tossed at us like a giant shuriken. The minigun on our shoulder aimed at the wing and started shooting with impossible speed, destroying it with a hail of lasers rather than the bullets it once fired. Should have let me go, Creel shouted. He grabbed another piece and threw it, only for us to catch it with smooth ease the armor hadn't been capable of before. You know, I still sympathize with this guy, but... Rhodey said both with words and thoughts. His fingers twitched, only for him to stop when he realized how easily he was crushing the wing in his grip. Yeah, let's finish him for his own good, I agreed. We cocked our arm back and threw the piece of Quinjet back. It hit Creel with incredible force, sending him flying across the top of the flight deck, going through another Quinjet and sending flames up into the air in his wake. Newly created ports opened on our back, and the incredible power of the arc reactor flared from the new and upgraded repulsors I'd created. Moving as one, we flew towards Creel. Rhodey activated his HUD and read the material Creel was made of through the accelerated simulation program. Quickly, I scanned the material with Rhodey, and together we searched on the internet and discovered the tensile strength and the various weaknesses it had, our minds working in tandem to plan our next step. By the time we flew past him and came to a stop, we had a plan, albeit a very simple one. Watching him fly towards us, Rhodey and I came to a conclusion on how much force was needed to defeat Creel. By the time he was about to reach us, our right arm was punching forwards. Our forearm became a cannon, a mimicry based on my love of Mega Man, and we blasted him with a wave of sonic, laser, and repulsor energy. Each part of the blast was keyed to fire a specific amount of energy, made to overwhelm Creel without killing him. The blast hit Creel mid-flight, cancelling his forward motion and dropping him to the ground where he began turning back to his original state. About time, Rhodey said at the unconscious form of the superhuman. Now what? I make an entrance, I told him, separating from his body and joining with the helicarrier once more. As the floor under Rhodey became me, he looked around. Couldn't you have just shot Creel as a giant damn ship? Some things are personal, and Jarvis told me not to, I admitted through the helicarrier's speakers, knocking out any Hydra personnel within me with some newly constructed security measures, like taser guns popping out of the walls. Plus, I'm a firm believer that War Machine combining with Upgrade is cool as shit. Hell yeah, it is. Kinda weird you became my armor though. I just know Tony is going to make jokes about this later, Rhodey said a little disgruntled, watching as the floor under Creel opened up to pull him into me. A series of slides brought him to the brig, along with all the Hydra soldiers I'd knocked out within my halls and rooms. Once I was done, I focused on my next task, checking out the situation up top. Then I pointed my guns up at the ceiling and started shooting at low power. Natasha Romanoff/Black Widow. Natasha was wearing her black outfit, having discarded her disguise for the easier-to-move-in clothes. Clint had done the same, wearing his purple long coat and quiver. Together the two had joined Sharon Carter and her group and were now cleaning out the rest of the Triskelion. So you should just give him a chance, Natasha said as she strode confidently next to Sharon, holding her pistols up and watching for any threats as X and Jarvis calmly informed her of what was happening at their destination. Is this really the time to talk about this? Sharon gave Natasha a look. She'd put on a bulletproof vest now, looking strangely petite in the oversized body armor while carrying a massive assault rifle. Always time for romance, Clint said, his bow held at the ready. Seriously, I worry about Steve. I really don't think he's my type, Sharon admitted, ignoring the chuckles of the agents behind her. Natasha and Clint gave her a stunned look. Are you kidding? Have you seen Steve? Clint asked, shocked. The man is built like a demigod? I mean that literally, Thor is one of my best friends and those two could be brothers. Looks aside, he's got that a shucks nice guy thing going on, Natasha added. He's sweet. They came to a door and stopped outside, taking positions next to it. After a shared nod, Natasha and Clint kicked it open. Inside was a room full of cubicles, like something one would see in any office in North America, with a massive window was on the other side of the room that displayed the crystal mountain outside. The soldiers inside would have looked out of place in any office setting, however. They were setting up blocks of C4 in the middle of the room, apparently under orders to cause as much destruction as they could. Natasha had to admire how many standing orders Hydra had prepared, which didn't change the fact they were still aggravating. Hydra soldiers began to fire at them, killing one of the SHIELD agents. Natasha rolled behind a cubicle, then rose up and shot two men in the head. Clint fired an arrow in the center of the group. When it hit, it released a brief EMP burst, deactivating the detonators in the hands of the soldiers before they could blow the C4. He fired another shot that pierced a soldier's throat before ducking when bullets were sent his way. Sharon fired her assault rifle for a moment, killing one soldier and sending another one to duck away. While the cubicles were terrible for cover, being easy to shoot through, they were perfect for concealment. Something kind of nice about this, Natasha yelled, leaping forward to punch a man in the throat, kick him to the floor, and drop a knee into his chest, firing her pistol again at the other soldiers while a SHIELD agent next to her shot the man she was holding down. Really? Clint asked loudly, firing an explosive arrow to cut off three men trying to run away, then shooting one of them in the thigh, leaving him to quickly bleed out. I guess I can see it. Are you crazy? Sharon asked, leaning out of cover, trying not to think about the fact she had never bantered during a fight before. What is nice about this? We're killing former SHIELD. Hell, I know that guy. She followed her statement by shooting that guy in the chest, hitting his shoulder instead when he ducked aside. Yeah, but at least it's just normal people in this fight, Natasha said, catching a grenade out of the air and tossing it back to explode. Nothing crazy, just dash. Boom! Outside the window behind the Hydra soldiers, a portion of the crystal mountain disappeared in a blaze of green light and sound. The entire building shook, and some of the windows cracked. Everyone in the room stopped, looking outside. Dust fell from the sky above, a shiny blue-green one reminiscent of something from fairy tales. It took a moment for Natasha to realize the dust was the remains of the crystal that had been destroyed. From the hole that had appeared in the center of the mountain, rose a helicarrier. The Hydra soldiers cheered. Natasha shared a look with horror with Clint, worried that the impossible had happened. That one of the helicarriers had been able to somehow blast its way free. Then they looked closer. It shone a bright black, with circuits of green. Its weapons looked different, very futuristic, with sections of green script shifting along them. And on the side, was an enormous emblem. The Omnitrix. This is Dial, a familiar voice boomed. I have control of War Machine Helicarrier 01. Stand down, all Hydra forces. In a display of power, the guns on the bottom of the ship twirled towards the bridge where the ground vehicles were being brought in. Yep, Sharon said in shock. Normal. Sam Wilson/Falcon. Sam flew next to Iron Man, diving towards the convoy of vehicles on the ground with the other flyer. A gunship fired bullets at Sam, forcing him to veer off slightly before the gunship was hit by a repulsor beam. A lot easier to do this when your wingman can shoot lasers. They're not Iron Man side. Whatever, I'll give you some upgrades when this is over so you can shoot something more useful than those pea shooters while flying. For now, holy shit. Iron Man stopped to stare in the distance, floating in the air. Sam turned to look, then twisted in the air to hover. Damn. This is Dial, a familiar voice boomed from the speakers of the ship. I have control of War Machine Helicarrier 01. Stand down, all Hydra forces. The guns on the ship turned, pointing at the bridge. Falcon and Iron Man were defending. Then they fired. For a moment, the ship seemed to glow like a green sun before a wave of power hit the bridge. Pinpoint fire slammed into the sonic cannons on the vehicles, the guns on top of the Humvees, and the weapons on the gunships. The soldiers were hit by concussive blasts, breaking ribs as impossible shots curved to smash into their chests, no matter where they tried to hide. The tanks brought in were hit hardest, torn to pieces as bullets covered in energy sliced through the treads, the main cannon, and the engine block. Some shots slammed into the bridge, tearing massive craters that sent men flying into the air to get hit once more before falling, groaning, to the bridge. In an instant, the entire convoy was left shattered. Damn, maybe you should open with that next time, Dial, Sam said in shock. There wasn't a way for me to do this until a couple minutes ago, Dial said over the comms. Hold on, more lasers fired into the distance. A fleet of Quinjets were headed over here, I just took them out. They'll have to land in a bit. So, yeah, the Omnitrix just gave me this power. I'm going to study the shit out of that watch, Iron Man added floating upwards. We're not done yet, Fury said over the comms. I've got reports that Hydra around the world is scrambling. Someone is communicating despite our efforts. We need to convene our next move. Take in the rest of Hydra in the area. Dial, if you stop doing whatever you're doing, can we still use that helicarrier? Yes, though the windows are still blown out. Plus it'll be a normal Insight helicarrier. Just a normal advanced version of the most powerful aircraft in the world then. I can work with that. We got 2 helicarriers to work with that. Maria, you're in charge of the Triskelion. It's time we get everyone together. Mahmoud Sheikh/Dial. It was weird. I'd expected there to be some big climatic finish to the fight. One of us having a big fight to the death in an exploding building or something. Instead, we just had more work to do. Hydra soldiers to arrest and put in cells, people to speak to, assets to reposition, medical supplies and ammunition to pass out. Stuff I'd known were part of superheroics, but never really thought of. First, I had to help a friend with a personal matter. Okay, get him in here, I said to Steve as we walked through the hallways of the helicarrier I'd stolen. The ship was in flight, headed to stop an attack that was still happening. There were 4 of us. I was back in human form, my gun and knife back in their holsters and my watch set to diamond head in case of surprises. Steve's helmet was off, his shield on his back, with Tony armorless at his side. Steve had Bucky in massive cuffs similar to the ones Steve and I had been put in yesterday. Damn. Anyways, the Winter Soldier was looking angrily around as Steve gently led him along, his gaze especially hard towards Tony, who only returned a smug grin every time they met eyes. I opened a steel door and waved the 3 inside, following them after. Okay, made these special for you and Creel, I waved at the room in front of us. Well, S.H.I.E.L.D. had them for field imprisonment. I just put in here with some of the stuff Tony and I made. It had been a cafeteria once, though thankfully the helicarrier was way too new for any of the interesting smells of an older dining area would have to settle in. I'd removed a lot of the tables, replacing them with 2 large boxes in the middle of the place. They were massive steel things the size of cells on the inside, the interiors made of square plush foam similar to a mental institution's padded cells. One held Creel, who turned and looked at us as we entered. He was sitting he had a screen in front of him playing a winding series of lights. He quickly turned to look at it, ignoring us in favor of focusing on the screen. The other cell had a chair with some screens around it, some arms set to wrap around a person's head. As soon as Bucky saw it, he flipped out. He spun to attack Tony with a kick, only for Steve to block it on his arm. Whoa, Tony yelled, backing away. Steve, your friend is still an asshole. Bucky, it's not what you think. Steve yelled. You're not putting me in there. Bucky shouted. Diamond Head. As soon as I transformed, I grabbed Bucky by the shoulders, pulling him close. Since his arms were bound behind him, his only option was to kick. His foot bounced off my groin, leaving me glad I wasn't a human for a moment. Creel. I yelled out. Tell him. They're not brainwashing, Barnes. Creel yelled out. They're curing us. I pulled Bucky into my arms. He roared, trying to escape my grasp. Even with Diamond Head's strength and Bucky's restraints, he still gave me a hell of a fight. Buck. Steve stepped forward. I promise, we aren't going to hurt you. Bucky stared at him with wild eyes. You know me. I'd never hurt you. We're going to get rid of what Hydra did. Please, calm down. Bucky looked over at Creel. The tall bald man nodded. I don't have to comply. I still want to, but I don't believe my compliance will be rewarded. That meant something to the Winter Soldier. He calmed down in my arms. Tony and Steve stared at him as his breathing relaxed. When I was sure he wasn't going to attack, I released him but stayed Diamond Head. When Zola created his brainwashing methods, I explained. He wanted a way to counter it. Selfish bastard wanted it in case one of his rivals tried to do it to him. But with it, we can cure you. It'll take time, but you'll be restored. Tony and I even improved it. Bucky stared at the device in his soon-to-be cell as though it were the devil. But when Steve gently guided him towards it, he complied. Tony shook his head, looking over at me. Hell of a pair. Blame Hydra, I replied. We need to take those assholes out. Several people entered the cafeteria. SHIELD personnel with degrees I couldn't pronounce came in. Steve gently strapped Bucky down, whispering gently to him. Once Bucky was completely set in his seat, the scientists went inside. Well, time to clean the crazy Russian super assassin's brain, Tony said flippantly. You know, I still think we should give him some improvements. I could make him as smart as me. Well, maybe a little less than half, but still. I think he'll be fine with just being himself. I looked at Tony. I gotta go. You gonna be okay here? Tony hesitated. He stared at Bucky for a moment, and I saw his fists clench. He looked at Steve, then lifted his eyes towards my bright yellow ones. After a moment, he sighed. He killed my parents. And I know, it wasn't his fault. But it still bothers me. Tony shook his head. The only two things that are going to push me through this is that Steve wants his friend back, and Natasha promised to help me track down the asshole who gave the order. I nodded. Tony didn't notice, simply walking forward to enter the cell. Hey, a certain bald superhuman said. I looked over at Creel. He was leaning against his door, his face pressed against the window. How will I know when this is done? I walked over to be face to face with him, returning to my human form with a tap on the Omnitrix. When you can hear words like comply and reward without feeling pleasure, happiness, or need. Creel winced, staring at me. And then what? You let me go. Not up to me, Creel, I admitted. If it was my choice, I'd probably just let you go. Well, not before letting Wrath have another go with you. Give it a shot, Creel challenged. For a moment, we glared at each other. Funny. I'd never had a rivalry with anyone before. But right now, we're trying to counter Hydra with all we've got. They're attacking the SHIELD Academy, so we'll start there. Once we've had time to sit down, we'll see. Creel didn't seem satisfied with that. He stared at me for a bit longer, then turned and walked to sit at his chair again, staring at the TV with intensity as lights played across his face. I looked at him a moment longer, then at the cell next door, where a metallic headband was being placed on Bucky's forehead. I sighed and left the room. How are our two brainwashed assassins doing? Fury asked as I entered the bridge. Hey, I take offense to that. While Clint tried to say it jokingly, he ended up more morose towards the end of his sentence. Natasha noticed, giving him a sad smile, and he returned it with a chagrined nod. They're okay, I said. It'll take time before we can say they're free of their conditioning. But for now, they're on their way. I just wish we didn't have to do it on the move. It's the only choice we have. Fury looked around. The bridge had been totally repaired by my jury rig form. As it turned out, upgrade didn't return items to undamaged states, something War Machine's armor also showed. As jury rig, I'd altered the area at the front of the room where Rhodey and I had blown Creel out of with a big steel wall that projected a holographic image of the outside. It also worked as a main control for the ship, allowing Fury to pilot it with his eye alone. The room was full of SHIELD agents working at the consoles. X's device was plugged into a wall nearby. I walked by and gave X an affectionate pat. Okay, when do we deploy? I asked Fury, sitting next to Natasha. He scoffed. Yeah, I'm still not sure I should deploy you. Are you just saying that out of habit by now? I asked. Paranoia has kept me alive so far, Fury admitted. But yay, let's get this done. Natasha, you, Dial and War Machine will go to one academy. Clint, you go to the other with Falcon, and some of the Quinjet pilots. I'll stay here with Steve and Tony in the meantime. Meanwhile, the helicarrier Sharon and the council are on will head to the rendezvous. Should Sharon really be in charge of a helicarrier? Natasha asked curiously. Fury smiled. I trust her. And her name, despite her wishes otherwise, has a history. You all head out in 5. For now, I believe you have something to talk about with him. He nodded towards me. I groaned in annoyance. Oh come on, is 5 minutes enough for interrogation? No, Natasha stood up and waved for me to follow. But I promise, it's not an interrogation. I just want to talk. Still feeling hesitant, I rose up, looking back at Clint. I expected a smirk, but instead, he nodded silently, his face carefully neutral. Well, that didn't bode well. Natasha led me into a side room, some place filled with lights and levers that jury rig would have loved to tear apart. The space was narrow, barely big enough for us both. I raised my eyes as Natasha turned around. You know, if you wanted to get me alone while you're wearing a leather outfit, asking help from Fury to do it just makes it weird, I said, trying to seem casual. Natasha, way more of an expert at the game of talking out of your ass while being super cool, raised an eyebrow. That's not why you're here. I didn't say anything. Your hands, Natasha said. I looked down at them. They're shaking. Not often, but every once in a while. And then there's the Omnitrix. You keep looking for reasons to change. Used to be only when you needed it. But now, I leaned against the wall and sat down, pressing my back against the levers and lights on the cold steel behind me. My legs were squeezed in by the tight space. Natasha sat down next to me. I found the body, she said. Down below, stabbed in the throat, with footprints of a human and swamp fire next to it. Yeah, I said softly. I changed into him right after. She nodded. How do you feel? I don't know, I admitted. I know that I had to do it. It was him or me. But I thought any kill I did it would be me shooting a guy with feedback, or shooting a crystal as Diamond Head or nothing that personal. Not as me. Not while looking into his eyes. Natasha didn't speak. So, you've killed people. I mean, I know I had to do it, and it helps to remind myself of that, but any idea what I should do? Should I try to get over it so I can process it easier next time? Or just? I trailed off, not saying anything else. I'm not the person to tell people what their morals should be, Natasha admitted. Hell, ask Steve and Tony and they'll tell you the exact opposite. I don't care, I said. I'll talk to them later. Right now I have you. Poor you, Natasha teased. After a bit of silence, she tapped my knee. Look, everyone processes this differently. Talking helps some people. Some are just born for it. Others never get over it. And some can take it and keep doing it when it's necessary. You won't know which you are until you find yourself in the moment again. Killing isn't something we all should reach for. But when it's necessary, you might have to again. I nodded slowly, not accepting it. But this was the real rule. I might have to kill again. If I wanted to survive. For some reason, that helped. Knowing I'd only done it when I needed to, that I would only do it if I had to, having someone else say it helped. For now, stick by me. I'll protect you, Natasha said with a smirk. I chuckled. Don't I have the watch with the uber-powerful aliens on it? Yeah well, Natasha rose up, helping me as well. Somehow, I feel like you still need protection. Now come on. We have a mission to do. I smiled down at her. Yes, ma'am. Chapter 15, Loose Ends. When we got close enough, Natasha launched us in a Quinjet while Clint took Falcon in another one. It was kinda cool, being part of a fleet of Quinjets separating to fly from a giant flying command center. The helicarrier was behind us in moments. Rhodey and I sat in the back, his armor standing in the center of the large space in a tall rack. It was weird speaking to Rhodey. In a weird way, I now knew him better than anyone else in the world. We had been one, and my direct link to Zola's algorithm had given me even more intimate knowledge than that. But there was something else to talk about. While we were up, when you were linked with the suit, Rhodey said in the seat across from me, Jarvis managed to get an understanding of what you were doing. Tony thinks he can replicate it. I cocked my head. What, make a permanent upgraded war machine? No, Rhodey shook his head. He thinks he can, in a limited way, make his own version of your alien. I stared at him. Yeah, he said with a nod. Jarvis found out that upgrade is technically made of some combination of organic matter and nanotechnology. Rhodey waved a hand dismissively. I don't know, it is way over my head. But he wants to use the data from War Machine to study it. I looked over at War Machine, thinking about that. In the comics, Tony had done some amazing stuff with nanotechnology. Made suits as close to liquid as they were solid steel, really bleeding edge stuff. Pun intended. But Upgrade wasn't just nanomachines, he was a living being. If Tony went too far, he would create actual life just like the Galvan and Azimuth did by total mistake. And people who do that tend to end up with a lot of problems. Seriously, making life is generally a bad idea in fiction unless you cover all your bases, and even then it was a hit and miss kind of thing. The only reason the galvanic metamorphs worked out is cause the Galvan instantly treated them as their own people the second it was made clear they were sapient. Even then, malware still showed up, though it could be argued whose fault that was. So, needed to figure out what to do about such a thing. I need to talk to him about that, I said, still staring the War Machine armor. I looked at Black Widow, then got up and walked to look out the window. In the meantime, what's the mission? I mean, I know what it is, but I don't want to screw it up, so a refresher is good. The SHIELD Academy of Science and Technology is a few minutes away. We're meeting a man named Tomasz Calderon, who's assembled a squadron of Quinjets to join us. He'll make a perimeter with War Machine. You and I will go inside. You'll follow my lead while I'm training you. Training me? I asked, blinking. I'm multitasking, Natasha said simply. You'll stay human unless I say otherwise, and I'll see how you do. Not sure if you noticed, but once you return to being a human you are not exactly much of a threat and people can easily take advantage of that. Besides, this way we can conserve the watch so you don't time out too quickly. I looked over at Rhodey, who smiled kindly. I looked back at Natasha. Shouldn't that be something I learn at a training facility or something? Well, we are going to an academy. Natasha gave me a grin. Smartass, I replied. How about Rhodey? You need to learn on the job, Rhodey said. And I've got the firepower in case someone attacks from the outside that the Quinjets can't handle. I nodded, but still felt uncomfortable. Natasha noticed. You want to transform, don't you? That was it. I was more comfortable being an alien right now. Stupid useless angst. I sighed in acknowledgement. I turned and walked over to sit across from Rhodey again. Yeah, I guess so. I shouldn't for a bit, should I? I'm no psychologist, Rhodey said. But I am a soldier. I remember my first kill, that moment after it's over. You know what I felt? Relief, I said. Rhodey nodded. Because I was alive. I even felt proud, that I'd beaten him, that I'd survived. And that's normal. It's human, man. We're supposed to do everything in our power to survive and to feel happy when we do. It's okay to feel that way, for a brief moment. It's normal to feel horrified afterward too. Just remind yourself that you're doing the right thing and that you have people to talk to. Then you can go to therapy if you need it, Natasha said seriously. But for now, we have a mission. Strap in. I put on the belts on my seat as Rhodey did the same next to me. Natasha lowered the Quinjet, the motion of the jet giving me a feeling similar to when an elevator dropped, that shift when your stomach is left catching up with the rest of you. Rhodey drew my attention with a wave, pointing at a headset hanging from the ceiling, and put one on his own head. I followed his directions as the sound of other aircraft could be heard outside. Calderon, this is Romanoff, do you read? Natasha said on her headset. Rhodey and I listened. It was silent for a long uncomfortable moment. I read you, Romanoff, a male voice responded. He didn't sound happy. So Fury sent you. Will that be a problem? Natasha asked. No, the guy said after a moment too long for his answer to be honest. Rhodey and I shared a look. You have any Avengers with you? No, just 2 specialists. Normal. She looked back at us. Rhodey and I shrugged. Not really? Christ, the guy cursed. Fine, whatever. We'll discuss when we land. Can't wait, Natasha rolled her eyes. If it helps, technically we are normal, we just have really cool toys. Doesn't matter to some people, Rhodey replied. My armor is enough for most people to get really worried. That watch is probably worse considering it's not human-made. Hell, it explicitly turns you into aliens. I sighed at that but nodded. Sadly, most people wouldn't believe the Omnitrix is technically a diplomatic tool rather than a weapon. Natasha didn't say anything as we came in towards the building ahead. When we landed, Rhodey got into his armor, the suit opening in the front to let him inside. I made sure the Omnitrix was tied on my wrist, not really necessary, but it was a ritual I was used to. Then Natasha walked up to me and handed me something while looking me in the eyes. I want you to stay human for a bit, that doesn't mean I'm leaving you defenseless. She reached into a pocket and took out a pair of tiny discs, passing them to me. Taser discs, she explained as I stared at the small circles. They release a burst of electricity when you activate them. Use them as projectiles if you have to. Got it, I put them into a pouch on my belt. We waited for the back of the Quinjet to open, then went down the ramp. The school was quiet. We'd landed in the parking lot of the academy, which had several black SUVs parked in a circle and one other Quinjet on the ground. The school itself looked like any college or university I'd ever seen in my life, if more modern, with a large shield symbol high up on one of the walls. More Quinjets hovered around the school, with soldiers running around. They all had their phones strapped to their hips, the Hercules app flashing green. Some of the soldiers had gathered around the Quinjet with guns drawn. We confidently stepped out like badasses, and the Hercules app at their waist flashed green, prompting them to lower their guns. Sorry about that, one man said. While he wasn't dressed in black combat gear like the others, he seemed to be in charge. A tall, bald man, wearing a vest over a button-up shirt and a small bulletproof vest over that. We weren't sure if it was really you. He came up and held a hand out to Natasha, who shook it. Tomasz Calderon, I'm here to assist in your operation, Agent Romanoff. Understood, Natasha said. She nodded towards us. These are my assets. War Machine and Dial. They Avengers? He asked, looking between us, noting Rhodey's armor and my very unique uniform. Reserve, she said, even though I wasn't sure there was an official name for what Rhodey and I were to the current shield. He said, a complicated look on his face. Problem? Rhodey asked. No, I have issues with people who have as much power as the Avengers do. But you helped us at the Triskelion, so it would be stupid of me to let my suspicions get in the way of my professionalism, Calderon said evenly. Very magnanimous of you, Natasha said diplomatically. Okay, my team is ready to go, Calderon said. 10 men, plus me. Got it, Natasha looked at Rhodey. You good? Yep. He gave me a friendly pat on the shoulder before his mask snapped down and he took off into the sky with a loud whoosh of noise. Huh, Calderon said, watching as Rhodey flew to join the Quinjets. He looked at me. So, you need a gun? I patted my handgun. He seemed to accept that as an answer. Okay, we move on Black Widow, he said to soldiers nearby. That means follow me, Natasha said helpfully, smirking when I gave her an annoyed glance. You want me to follow the buddy system? I asked as we walked towards the school. Do we get juice snacks when this is over? If you're good, she joked, then became more serious. Okay, you had time before and during the flight to study this place. What do you know? The first lesson about missions is learn everything you can about them, Natasha said, going up some stairs as the soldiers followed. The location, the targets, evacuations points, history, allies nearby. What do you know about it? The school is one of 3 run by SHIELD, I said hurriedly. SHIELD sends all the smart people they can hear, the ones with PhDs. It's run by Dr. Jennifer Weaver. Good enough. Some soldiers ran ahead to the glass doors ahead, opening them for us as Natasha and I took out our guns. Next time, I want you to try and memorize maps of the area we're trying to attack. Even the slightest idea of what a place is like can save your life, or save others. I nodded, kinda amazed at the turn my life had taken that lead to me getting lessons from Black freaking Widow. Okay, I'll take point. You stay by my side. Calderon, you're up front with us. Dial, you get ready to transform if need be. Okay. Understood, Calderon and I said in unison. We entered the school. The place was an odd combination of clean and futuristic with the messy aftermath of an evacuation. Despite all the glass windows, stylish statues, and clean marble everywhere, there were also papers spread all over the place, scuff marks on the floor, signs of people running away from something. It was eerily quiet in the school. We walked through the hallways as a group, moving at a loping pace. I tried to copy the professionalism of the soldiers around me but found it easier to just walk like a human being and not a loaded spring. Okay, down this hallway, Tomasz said, leading us to the right. The bunker should be in the next building. Things felt tense. It felt like we were in the middle of a haunted house, with the papers everywhere, the silence of everything except the Quinjets outside and our footsteps. I took a breath and looked at Natasha. She wasn't affected by the tense atmosphere, just doing that catwalk she did that drew the eye. When she saw me looking she smiled. Always project confidence, she whispered. Even when you're worried. Are you? I asked her. More suspicious, she said. Hydra should have sent someone, anyone. These are the most brilliant minds in the world, but they left them untouched. Even the Hydra personnel hidden among the faculty and students gave up without a fight. That worries me. Suddenly, a loud sound came from ahead of us. We all froze, aiming our guns forwards. Or they were waiting, Tomasz said. We went towards the noise. My palms were sweaty, forcing me to wipe them off on my pants so my grip wouldn't slip. When we got to the end of the hall, Tomasz pressed himself against the corner leading to a wide space. We went up against the wall behind him. He held a hand up and poked his head around the corner, then pulled back. He grabbed his phone and held it up. The Hercules app flashed red when he pointed it around the corner. Hydra, he confirmed what we already knew. 6 of them, moving around. How'd they get past the perimeter? I asked. No idea, Tomasz said, but they're there. Should we try to capture one? Yes, Natasha said, but leave that with me. Move in after I engage. Without waiting for a response, she went around the corner. We all shared a look. I said softly. I kinda wish I could see what was about to happen. Me too, a guy behind me said. Hello, boys, Natasha said from ahead of us. Tomasz leaned over to look. I put my head over his to see as well. Black Widow was fighting in a room full of cafeteria tables, the kind of place that students could hang out. I'd played a lot of Yu-Gi-Oh on tables like those. Natasha parkoured over a one such table and kicked a Hydra agent while his friends were staring at Natasha. Apparently, her casual greeting had been enough to throw them off. When the first guy was reeling back, the others raised their hands up. Natasha grabbed the guy she'd kicked and pulled him in front of her. The soldiers hesitated long enough to let me take a good look at them. They were all dressed in black uniforms, with purple visored helmets. Over the outfits, they wore what looked like exoskeletons with gold sections on the chest and extremities, sections of them glowing with purple lights. Their hands had what looked like gauntlets on hands, with a section over their knuckles looked like a fusion of a brass knuckle and an energy weapon. When they couldn't get a shot on her, 3 of them activated rockets on their backs and feet, lifting into the air to move around. Natasha threw a taser disc at one of the flyers, making him scream and quiver in the air, slamming through a couple tables in uncontrolled flight. Now, Tomasz yelled. We went around the corner fast, the soldiers firing their guns as they moved in. After a moment of hesitation, I started shooting as well, my handgun bucking in my hands. Natasha shot the guy she was holding in the back and twisted out of the way of an attack. Hydra started shooting purple beams from the gauntlets on their hands, one shooting towards us. I ducked a beam and shot my gun at the guy who'd shot at me. He dodged and fired a shot at the soldier next to me, hitting him in the arm and sending him screaming to the floor with his arm removed. Incensed, I grabbed a taser disc and threw it at the guy. It attached to his foot, sending him into convulsions. The guy whose arm had been blasted off shot the Hydra agent in the throat. Natasha leaped from a pillar to grab one of the flying soldiers, bring him down and electrocuting him with her widow's bite gauntlets, the tasers built into her wrists. He screamed, passing out after a minute. One of the SHIELD soldiers died when the last Hydra agent shot him and tried to blast out of a window, but he fell under the hail of bullets that hit him as assault rifles fired on his retreating form. Tomasz looked around in the aftermath of the attack, turning to give Natasha and me a look of sadness when he saw one agent dead and another missing an arm. How did they get here? What is this stuff they got a hold of? Let's ask. Natasha looked at the Hydra agent on the floor. Dial, we may have more in the base. Go fast track, search through the academy and find out if there are others. I looked at her. She nodded. I raised the watch and switched to fast track, pressing the face down. In a moment, blue and black fur appeared on my form. I gave Natasha a wave, ignoring the shocked gasps that followed my turning into an alien. I was about to leave when I looked at the dead S.H.I.E.L.D. agent, then the one whose arm had been removed, who was being tended to by one of his friends. Then I turned to Tomasz. I'm sorry about your man there. I looked back at the man who'd lost his arm. And try to visit me when you get the chance. I'll try to whip you up a new arm. I left immediately afterward. Damn, Natasha was right. I really wished I'd read a map before coming here. I did my best, rushing through each hallway, sending papers scattering through the place in my wake. Empty classrooms, offices, dorms, nothing for a bit. Then I got to the other side of the campus. Hydra agents, about 15 men and 1 woman. The men were all dressed in the same futuristic armor as the others. The woman, funnily enough, wore a brown leather jacket and had a black tank top on. She also looked like Michelle Rodriguez. Damn it, she was probably someone special, if the trend in this universe followed. They were in one of the larger classrooms, the kind I saw in movies about colleges all the time, with the amphitheater style set up. I was at the top where the students sat, while Hydra had taken positions at the bottom near the professor's desk. As I watched, 3 more people popped into existence, surprising the hell out of me. They looked up when I entered, but I ran out the other door and activated the communication function of the Omnitrix. This is Dial. I've found more Hydra at the classrooms. They're teleporting in somehow. We know, Natasha said. The guy we caught says Hydra has some sort of item, a phase something. He doesn't know the full name. Apparently, it lets them teleport wherever they have coordinates. Shit, I cursed. Okay, I'm going to switch to jury rig and create something to cut them off from teleporting. Can you do that? Natasha asked. No idea, but jury rig hasn't failed me yet, I responded. They're dropping into lecture hall 17B. I'm going to go grab some computers to make the device and try stopping them. Go ahead, Natasha said quickly. We'll meet you there. Rhodey, you hear all that? Yeah, I got it, Rhodey responded. Even if they've got cheap copies of Tony's armor, I can stop them. Let us know if you and the Quinjets need help, Natasha said. Clint, Falcon, you get that? Yeah, we'll keep an eye out if they try to teleport to this academy too, Clint answered. Tomasz is going to send a team to the bunkers. We'll meet Dial near their entry point, Natasha said. Move out. Author's note. So yeah, this was fun to write. The war is just beginning, and Hydra is bringing a lot of toys out early. So Natasha asking Dial not to transform. There are reasons for it. First, using the aliens as an escape, treating his human form like it's somehow bad for him to confront his issues without changing personalities, is a bad idea. The Omnitrix has safety features to prevent that for good reason. More pragmatically, she wanted to wait until necessary to change him because the Omnitrix timeout is so unpredictable. Waiting will conserve the energy until it's needed. As soon as she saw there was danger, they were good. That said, Dial would have transformed anyways the moment he had to. He just knows good advice when he hears it. Chapter 16, Davida. It didn't take me long to find a place with things I could make use of. Luckily I was in a school dedicated to science and technology and I soon found a room dedicated to engineering that was full of things like robot arms, half-built computers, and something that looked like a laser gun that had married a video game console. Everything was placed on the various tables and counters in haphazard ways, which made sense since any students that had been in there had evacuated out before they could put away their projects. I didn't stop to admire them. I entered the room as fast track and tapped the Omnitrix. I didn't call out when I changed, the need to be silent overriding the habit. Something interesting happened when I turned into the tiny form of jury rig this time. As I looked around at all the half-finished projects I could see all the love and care that had been put into them. Someone had clearly tried to build something beautiful with that robotic arm, something that could replace prosthetics. That computer over there had a chip more advanced than anything on the market, but I could see it was made for video games. It was a passion project, not just a school assignment. Most of what I could see was made by people who loved creating things. So I hopped onto the table and patted the robotic arm affectionately. Then I ignored it, and all the others. Instead, I ran to a shelf full of parts and tore into it, metal shelf included. A calculator had been left on the floor, so I grabbed that too. Disassemble. I coughed a moment later. Disassemble, I whispered this time. Hopefully, there were no Hydra nearby to hear that first cry. I focused on my work, going through the various objects before finally finishing my first device. Considering the time crunch, I'd been forced to make something less ornate than I would have wanted, just something similar in shape to the Stargate from, well, Stargate. I raised the ring up in my red claws and adjusted it a bit. I whispered. You connected? Yes sir, he replied. Good, I'm about to activate this teleportation jammer. It'll work, but I want to see if the range is what I'm hoping for. I thought you were going to ask me to self-destruct. I blinked in shock. What? It is the common next step in fictional stories when a computer gains sentience despite the creator's wishes. In order to assuage any fears you may have, please know I am ready to self-terminate. I do not wish for you to be in trouble for my creation, nor to lead you to fear that I will hurt you or others. To that, I could only shake my head. What kind of angsty? Those stories are bullshit. If you want, we can discuss it in full later, but know that I trust you. If it helps, focus on Data from Star Trek, or Kit from Knight Rider. Then you'll know why I'm not worried. For now, we've got work to do, buddy. I felt like I'd been very abrupt. But the idea I couldn't trust X was ridiculous. Maybe, if I'd been human, I'd have been nicer. As jury rig, I knew him more than anyone else I'd ever meet. The question of his loyalty was ridiculous. Understood, sir, he said over the comms. With that, I activated the ring. The center of the ring ejected several panels that changed the ring into a round disc, closing the iris. I can read the range of effect, sir, X said. It covers every bit of the school. I tweaked the device a bit. It has extended a yard. How far can you have the range of your device cover? Not as much as I wish, I admitted. But it will be enough to prevent easy access to the school, and defend the rendezvous when we get there. Placing the iris device on my waist, I made one more device before I was finished. I reached for the Omnitrix and changed into fast track, the devices I'd made resting on my hips. I ran for the room, then took a detour to hide one of the devices I'd made, a just-in-case measure. This is Dial, I've finished the device. When they try to teleport in, they'll just bounce back to where they came from now. Good, Natasha said. Come back, we're going to need you. I'm already here, I said, coming to a stop next to her an instant later. Tomash and his guys pointed their guns at me, but Natasha held her hand up to stop them and nodded. They were a few rooms from the lecture area that Hydra had taken as a beachhead if they hadn't moved on. More SHIELD agents stood with us, ready to move in, with some downstairs. All right, let's move in, Natasha said. Dial, take out as many as you can while we move in. 3, 2, I leaned into a sprinting position. 1 dash. I was gone in an instant. I entered the room and looked around. The Hydra soldiers seemed confused as to why no more of their people were teleporting in. Apparently, they'd been hoping for more numbers before going on the attack, but there were only about 40 in the room now. Some were floating in the air in their armor like discount Iron Men. I leaped towards one at super speed, smashing my feet into his chest as he floated there. I pushed off from him to jump towards another guy, twisting in the air to punch him in the face. As soon as I hit the ground, I was running again. Hydra realized there was someone in their midst, and tried to aim at me. But fast track was way too fast. I ducked around a purple bolt by dropping into a slide, then popped up for a blisteringly fast uppercut that sent a guy backflipping to smash into a wall. I did a back kick into another guy's knee, shattering his leg, then ran to a man who was taking off. He tried to shoot me, and I was forced to spin around the purple energy bolt. As soon as I was safe, I leaped up and grabbed him as he tried to fly away, pulling him down before spinning around 10 times and throwing him at his friends. At the same time, SHIELD rushed into the room through the upper and lower doors. They charged in, weapons raised, yelling for surrender. That's when the woman who looked like Michelle Rodriguez acted. Her eyes began to glow a bright red, which could not be a good sign. She looked at the SHIELD agents that had entered through the lower floor. They started staring at her with uncomfortably lustful eyes. Then they pointed their guns at the SHIELD agents on the higher level and started shooting. Down. Tomash yelled, ducking behind some desks. What the hell are they doing? Dial, get their guns. Natasha yelled, shooting a Hydra agent in the head before her cover was blown apart by a purple beam, forcing her to switch to a different section. I had a moment of shock before I ran towards the SHIELD agents. I passed through their ranks 3 times, grabbing their guns and piling them in my arms before running upstairs to drop them next to Tomash and his men. I looked at the SHIELD agents, who blinked at their now empty hands before they pulled out handguns. I was going to run and pull those out of their hands as well when the SHIELD agents held their guns to their heads. Stop. Michelle Rodriguez's double shouted. The room froze for a moment. Natasha looked at her and cursed. Davida. Hey, Nat, the woman said casually. The SHIELD agents below, still holding guns to their heads, moved to join the Hydra soldiers. You look good. So do you, Natasha said casually, pointing her gun at the Hydra soldiers. That's a new trick. She nodded towards the SHIELD agents currently threatening to kill themselves. The woman, Davida I guess, scowled but nodded. It's something Hydra gave me. I don't like using it, but I have my orders. Invade the academy and take the students. You're Hydra? Natasha asked. I'm hired by them, Davida corrected. Natasha, Tomash asked as I watched alongside him. Who is she? Davida smirked. Someone you love. Her eyes flashed red, which could not have been good. Damn it. Natasha attempted to fire her weapon. But by then, I was already in love with Davida. Why shouldn't I be? I'd always loved her. I'd only met her moments ago, but she was just so perfect. Everything about her, from her raven hair to the way her leather jacket and blue jeans hugged her form. That was when I saw Natasha pulling the trigger and acted before she could. With fast track speed, I kicked Natasha in the side. Not enough to break her ribs, but enough to push her to the floor. As she landed, Tomash and the other SHIELD agents grabbed at Natasha. She rolled to her feet, jammed an elbow into a soldier trying to wrap his arms around her, then kicked Tomash in the thigh when he tried to punch her. She leaped over a desk to escape another SHIELD agent's grasp. Then I grabbed her by her hair and pulled until she was bent backward. Natasha struggled against my enhanced strength for a moment, then tossed a taser onto my chest. Ayak. I screamed, letting go of her. Natasha spun away, then rolled when purple bolts and bullets aimed at her. Desperate to please my love, I ran towards her. Natasha got up to confront me, but she was far too slow. I was already. The Omnitrix timed out. I came to a stop in front of Natasha, who grabbed me by the shoulder and twisted around to throw me out the door behind her, the both of us getting out before bullets and purple beams passed through the air where we were once standing. Snap out of it. Natasha yelled at me, slamming my face into a wall. I already did. I yelled back. Natasha pressed me harder into the wall. Wait, what? I have a different brain now, pretty sure changing cures mind control. I yelled again. Although I was confused. I had been certain that the Omnitrix protected against that sort of thing, or maybe Davida's powers could overcome that somehow. That's useful, Natasha said. A whistle came from downstairs. We looked down the stairs and I groaned. Ah, shit. Davida was down the hall. She smirked up at us, then looked at me before her eyes glowed red. You Titanic bitch dash I had time to mumble. Then I was in love again. But this time Natasha was ready. She grabbed the Omnitrix the second it turned green, twisted the dial, and slammed down on it before flipping away. I grew several feet. Orange and black striped fur grew across my body. I roared, a massive blast of noise that felt like freedom. Wrath. Behind me, SHIELD agents stormed out to start shooting at me. I ignored the bullets bouncing off my skin with ease. Let me tell you something, Davida who is working for Hydra. I yelled, grabbing a SHIELD agent's gun and snapping it over my knee, before gently headbutting another. Wrath doesn't like getting mind controlled. Only Wrath can tell Wrath's brain what to do. I got in the way of bullets that would have hit Natasha. She grabbed my head and flipped over me to kick the guy who shot at her, then springboarded off my back to kick another guy. Wrath's mind is like a black hole that reflects light. I roared, then sliced a gun in half with my claw before grabbing a Hydra soldier that had come out of the room to throw him over Natasha as fought two other men. That's not how black holes work. Black Widow pointed out. Natasha grabbed another agent as he walked out and spun him to slam into a wall. I will protect my love. Tamash, yelling desperately, swung a metal baton surrounded by electricity, pressing it against me. I looked down at the baton sending a weak charge through my skin that left me wincing slightly, then grabbed it out of Tamash's hands and snapped it in half. That's when Davida had made it up the steps. She ran towards me with her soldiers hovering behind her and punched me in the face. To my shock, her fist sent me through the window behind me, sending me flying through the air with the loud sound of glass shattering. I fell into the courtyard below, and Davida followed, landing on my chest as the concrete below cracked under my landing. She looked into my eyes, smirking as they flashed red. You love me, she purred softly. Don't you? I stilled, locking my eyes onto her beautiful face. Wrath, loves you? Then I punched her in the chest. She let out a startled shout, flying back 20 feet and smashing through a pillar. Natasha Romanoff / Black Widow. Natasha spared a glance when a massive noise was followed by Davida flying back from a punch thrown by Wrath. Huh. Guess he's immune. She ducked a punch thrown by one of the SHIELD agents and focused on the task at hand. She grabbed the arm of the man who tried to punch and elbowed him in the chest with a vicious and quick strike. Then she ran. Bullets and purple beams flew towards her as she entered a door and ran through a classroom. This is Black Widow, she shouted over the noise. SHIELD agents have been compromised by a mind manipulator. Ma'am, X said over the comms. I can see you on the school's cameras. I can mark any SHIELD agents that have been affected by Davida DeVito's powers if you wish. I can use the Hercules app. Do it. Natasha yelled, rolling under a desk when another purple beam sizzled through the air to pass her. But I'm taking them out before that. In that case, Dial made sure to leave a non-lethal weapon nearby, in case he needed it, X said, surprising Natasha. Run down the hall, then enter the room on your left, the supply closet. He left a weapon for me, Natasha asked, sprinting at full speed before seeing the supply closet. She entered it and looked around. He left it for himself, X noted. A cautionary measure he did on a whim. It's installed with the Hercules app so that any Hydra using it would have it explode in their faces. A flashbang. Natasha sighed. I have no idea if I should commend him or be angry at him. She saw the device instantly. It looked like some sort of ray gun from an old sci-fi movie. Natasha grabbed it and looked it over. Any idea how to use it? Point and pull the trigger. What a time for the robot to discover sarcasm, Natasha said with a sigh. She left the room, holding the ray gun in a single hand. She took her time, listening closely to the area around her. After a moment of walking through the silent halls, she heard footsteps. Soon 3 SHIELD soldiers and a pair of Hydra flyers turned the corner. As soon as she saw them, she shot the gun in her hands. A strange green projectile shaped like a ball surrounded in a green ring slammed into one of the SHIELD soldiers, lifting him up and tossing him back. Natasha fired again, taking out one of the Hydra flyers. As the flyer fell out of the air, the other 3 men started shooting, but Natasha ducked aside into a bathroom. The soldiers rushed after her, entering a small side hallway. It was empty. For a moment, the 3 men looked around the small hallway in confusion, walked into the hallway. Hey boys, someone said, prompting the 3 to look up. Natasha had a smirk on her face as she held herself against the ceiling with her feet and hands against the walls to apply pressure and keep her in place, pointed her ray gun downwards. 3 loud shots rang out, followed by 3 bodies hitting the floor. Natasha dropped to the floor and went around the corner. Tamash stood there, looking surprised as they almost bumped into her. He swung a fist at Natasha but she ducked it to gut punch Tamash. He fell back, then received a kick in the head that brought him to the ground. Tamash went to rise up, but Natasha shot him in the chest, knocking him unconscious. Well, just a few more to go, Natasha mused to herself. Chapter 17, Wrath's Love. Mahmoud Sheikh/Dial. I rose to my feet and growled when 7 Hydra soldiers floated out of the window I'd broken to start shooting at me. Let me tell you something, stupid Hydra Iron Man knockoffs. I roared as they shot at me. Dumb purple beams aren't enough to stop true love. I leaped up, trying to pull one down so I could probably beat his face in, but he rose out of the way. Stand still so Wrath can beat you up and present your broken bodies to Wrath's beloved. To my frustration, they responded by shooting me in the face and chest with bright beams of purple light. Alright, that's it. Now Wrath's going to have to improvise because Wrath left his giant fly swatter at home. I took a page out of Creel's playbook and ran to a vending machine, grabbing and tossing it with great speed. Haley's flight. The Hydra soldier I threw it at tried to dodge but fell out of the sky when the vending machine full of candy bars and gummy bears slammed into his legs, shattering them. I grabbed another one, but Hydra separated to make it hard for me to aim. I roared. Then a hail of bullets came out of the sky. They hit one of the Hydra men shooting me, sending him to the floor in a pool of blood. Hey, kid. Rhodey flew over to me, firing 2 repulsor beams. These the guys? Yeah. I yelled happily. At the same time, Davida rose up from the remains of the pillar I'd sent her through and started striding towards us. And that's the woman Wrath loves. Rhodey looked at me through the face mask of his helmet. Wait, what? Hey, shoot her. I yelled. Wrath wants to see if she's bulletproof. You need to work on your romance, Rhodey mumbled. Then his minigun spun around and shot at Davida. She walked through the hail of bullets, letting them bounce off her skin with no effect. Her leather jacket was torn to pieces, her tank top and jeans were ripped, but her face was unchanged. Then she started to grow. Slowly, she rose in height and weight until she was only an inch shorter than I was, her body expanding with muscle, growing denser in general. Her jeans and tank top stretched as well, but held strong despite her growth, leaving her looking kinda badass. She looked over at Rhodey with a familiar smirk. I moved in front of him and smiled at her, not affected when her red eyes hit me. After all, I already loved her. You take Hydra, I said. Seriously, what is going on? Rhodey asked as he rose up to start dogfighting the Hydra soldiers now trying to kill him, dodging their purple beams to fire his repulsors. Let me tell you something, War Machine. I yelled joyfully, rushing towards the now massive Davida, who raised her fists up. Wrath's about to ask her to marry Wrath. If you're lucky, Wrath might just ask you to be Wrath's best man. Davida dodged around my charge, then grabbed me by the waist and spun to throw me through a wall. I crashed through the concrete and landed in a classroom. She ran after me, punching at my face as I rose up, but I blocked her fist on my arm. I clawed at her face, and she winced as the razor-sharp weapon on my fist bounced off her chin, though it did leave a small cut in the process. I grabbed her by the shoulders and headbutted her. Vredfort headbutt. She took the blow, then returned it with a headbutt of her own. With that, we began punching each other, our massive forms tearing through the school. Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes/War Machine. Rhodey shook his head as he watched the giant tiger and woman throw themselves into the school. I miss normal sometimes, Rhodey said to himself. Then he was flying after a Hydra soldier. The man tried to shot Rhodey as the pair flew in the air, but Rhodey dived around the glowing purple and fired a single repulsor blast into the other man's chest. As though signaled by the death of the first soldier, other Hydra came out of the building. All Quinjets. Rhodey yelled as he fired the machine guns on his arms and shoulder at the dozens of men rising into the sky. Prepare to engage hostiles, ones in power armor. Roger that, War Machine. Several aircraft spun to face the school. Rhodey dived into the Hydra flyers and smashed one in the chest with a hard kick, spinning to shoot another one with a repulsor blast as his minigun aimed fire at several more, hitting one in the legs and another in the chest. A Hydra agent flew into Rhodey's back and held on, shooting him in the back with his gauntlet weapon. War Machine yelled in pain as his HUD sent him warnings, and spun in the air to throw the guy off him before his minigun spun around to kill the man. War Machine rose up and fired off repulsor blasts and bullets as fast as he could. Hydra soldiers spun around in the skies and tried killing him, their purple beams sometimes slamming into him. Rhodey grunted as he took a couple hits to the chest that scared his armor, but thanked God for Tony when the suit held strong. The Quinjets joined in and started shooting as well. Some of the Hydra flyers swarmed one of the Quinjets, their gauntlet fire tearing the aircraft apart. Rhodey dived down suddenly when he saw a group of Hydra flyers trying to get to the parking lot. He went under a bridge while shooting one in the back with a repulsor, stopped to grab one by the leg and spin the Hydra flyer around to throw him at a stone bench, then flew forward shooting with every bullet he had. The men in the parking lot that had been turned into an evacuation point saw the Hydra flyers coming towards them and began firing upon them. Bullets and purple beams flew back and forth between the two groups. Rhodey joined in, shooting at the Hydra soldiers. One of them flew at Rhodey, screaming. One head falls, two shall rise. Rhodey blocked the punch the Hydra soldier threw at him, then fired a hail of bullets into the chest of the man, the Hydra flyer's armor shattering under the bullets before he fell. Guess I should take out 2 more, War Machine quipped. With that, he raised his arms and kept shooting, sparing a moment to wonder what the massive booming noises behind him were. Mahmoud Sheikh/Dial. You're good at this. I complimented, hoping she liked me as much as I liked her. Stadizian reversal. With a twist of my hips, I threw her to the ground and started punching her in the face. She took a bunch of blows that shattered the floor under her, then raised her legs up and kicked me in the chest. I flew up and crashed through the ceiling. She leaped up after me through the hole I'd made, punching me in the face. Yes. I roared in joy. Wrath knew you liked wrath. Are you a masochist? Davida replied, giving me a kick to the ribs that sent me flying through some desks. Wrath doesn't know what that means. I replied honestly, rising up as she ran towards me. I punched at her, and her fist smashed into mine. A shockwave was released by impact, destroying the area around us. Wrath would be honored if you married Wrath. There is something wrong with you, she yelled, stepping back. We're all crazy when we're in love. Davida dropped low and wrapped her arms around my waist, pushing me back and slamming me into a wall, then through it. I raised my arms up and slammed my claws into her ribs and back, over and over again. She yelled in anger, lifted up and pushed me through another wall. I backflipped as soon as I was through that wall, and rose to look at her. Damn it. Davida grabbed a teacher's desk and threw it at me. I punched it out of the air, ignoring the shattered pieces with ease. You're supposed to be in love with me. Why are you fighting? To prove Wrath's love. How else would Wrath do that? I shouted back with a grin. I leaped forward and she did the one thing that could have made me like her even more. She slipped under my attack, grabbed my waist, then bent backwards to slam me into a suplex that sent me down through the floor. I landed on the next floor with a massive smile on my face. You're a wrestler. Yay. Davida dropped through the floor and glared at me. So, let me tell you something. Pretty lady who looks like Michelle Rodriguez but is as big as me. I rolled to my feet and rushed her. It means Wrath can fight for real. Davida's Michelle Rodriguez face twisted into horror when I reached out and grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. Antarian arm bar. I sprinted forward with her in front of me, slamming her through a wall, then pressing her face into another one. Afiaku's faceplant. She yelled, twisting to throw me down the hallway we'd crashed into. I grabbed her arm to try and flip her, but she pulled a perfect counter to send me flying instead. I backflipped in the air and slammed my claws into the floor, slicing through the linoleum to come to a stop. Davida grabbed a water fountain out of the wall and threw it at me. I took the blow to my head and let the metal and plastic shatter around me. I ran towards her and slipped around a punch to go for a suplex. She countered by dropping from the grab before I could complete it, spinning to slam an elbow into my neck. I eyed her, trying to look unfazed by the blow. Then I pointed at the spot she'd hit. Wanna try again? Davida's eyes widened. Then she grinned. Boom. I grinned as she stepped back, the shockwave that followed her hit sending a crack of noise in the air. She stood still when I stepped forward and swung my elbow at her. Boom. She smiled in chow leg, not moving an inch. Boom, 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 boom. Back and forth, in a game of dominance, we slammed our elbows into each other's necks, chaining our attacks as we grinned at each other. After a bit, we stepped back. My neck hurt like hell, but I didn't react to it. Neither did she. I rushed forward with a running knee, and she stepped aside and clotheslined me. I slammed into the floor and rolled aside when she came with an elbow drop. I rose to my feet and grabbed her as she tried to rise up from the floor. At a disadvantage, I got her head between my knees, squeezing, then grabbed her hips. With a lift I raised her up so her legs were on my shoulder, then began to throw her back first towards the floor. Porsche power bow dash. Her legs wrapped around my neck. She spun around, pulling me with all her strength. Titania Hurricanrana. With a picture-perfect counter, I was sent flying, slamming into a trophy case, past that through another wall, then into a desk. I blinked for a second, then rose up and walked towards the hole my entrance made. Davida stared at me as I walked up. Titania like the moon? I asked. She shook her head, panting. No, it was my name when I wrestled. I nodded seriously, then groaned slightly in pain. She was strong, stronger than even Creel in his vibranium form. But I knew I could beat him even then, that only the Omnitrix timing out had stopped me. Wrath was unbeatable. And I knew I could beat her now, bruises or not. Wrath had to prove he truly loved her after all. I ran at her, and Davida tried to duck my outstretched arms. But I grabbed her by the hair and used my vicious grip to knee her in the face, over and over, until blood dripped from her nose. As she looked at me blearily, I got behind her and wrapped arms around her stomach. Finishing move. One suplex. Final. Another one, this time shaking the academy. Atomic. I leaped upwards, crashing through 3 floors before we ended up outside of the school, in the open air. I could see Quinjets battling Hydra soldiers, War Machine flying by to shoot one in the face. Then we began to drop. Buster. Floor by floor, Davida's head leading, we crashed through the school. Finally, we came to a stop on the bottom level. I rose up and looked down at Davida. As I watched, she slowly began to shrink until she'd returned to her former size. When she didn't move, I took her pulse, actually showing a bit of intelligence beyond fighting. Her heartbeat was there, she was just knocked out. Wrath wins? When you wake up we should get married, I said idly. Although, if you say otherwise, Wrath will respect your decision. Feeling warm towards the love of my life, I placed her on my shoulder and walked away, leaving the various holes in the ceiling and the crater we'd created behind. When I got outside, there were dead or injured Hydra everywhere. A few of them had been captured, however, getting pushed into a Quinjet. 2 of the Quinjets had been downed, but I didn't see more than a fraction of dead shield soldiers compared to Hydra. Natasha was speaking to an embarrassed-looking Tamash when I walked up, still in wrath form. Tamash glared at Davida, who was still unconscious on my shoulder. She dead. He asked angrily. I shook my head. Nah, just sleeping off the beating Wrath gave her. He scoffed. She deserves a bullet in the head. I don't know what she did, but I don't like having my mind played with. Davida DeVito, Natasha said with a sigh. Unenhanced with the power to grow in size and strength. Making people fall in love with her is new though, otherwise, I wouldn't have gone in there with so many. Natasha looked at me. Do her powers not work on you? Are you licensed to do marriages? I asked suddenly instead of answering, focusing on the real issue. Natasha and Tomasz stared at me, surprised. No I am not. I wilted in disappointment. Hold on, Tomasz said. If you're in love with her, why did you still fight her? I scoffed. Let me tell you something, Agent Tomasz Calderon of S.H.I.E.L.D. Apoplexians like Wrath know the best way to show true love is to show off your fighting skills. Throwing a punch is how we show we care. Whoever wins gets to marry the other one. Wait, you mean you get married no matter who wins? Natasha asked, looking confused. It's a win-win. I shouted proudly. Then I got worried. Unless she says no, then Wrath will be respectful. Right about then is when I timed out and became human again. I dropped Davida in surprise and blinked. I looked around. S.H.I.E.L.D. agents were staring at me. A couple were trying not to laugh and failing outright. Rhodey was floating nearby, his face played up so he could grin at me. Well, that's embarrassing. I stated. Understatement of the freaking century. Wrath, why do you cause as many problems as your fists solve? Natasha grinned at that. I can't wait to tell Tony about this. Yup. Any respect I'd gained from my fellow heroes had gone down the drain. I sighed and decided to start finding a nice place to dig a hole for me to live in. Thank you so much, Jennifer Weaver said as her students ran out of the school to head to Quinjet's moments later. Davida had been placed in a cryo unit I turned into jury-rigged to make suspended animation until we could jail her someplace she couldn't physically break out of. Not a problem, Tomasz said, a band-aid on his head from where Natasha had apparently kicked him while he'd been in love. Is this everyone? Tomasz said, ushering the students into the Quinjets. Almost, the grateful look on Weaver's face became a scowl. All the members of Hydra are going last. I'm not putting them together with the others. Despite her anger, there was some sadness in her eyes. Tomasz nodded, though he also had a sad look on his face as he watched some of his men get put in body bags. I watched from a bench nearby, Rhodey standing next to me. Man, that was a lot crazier than I expected, I admitted to Rhodey. Yeah, he said. I haven't had a routine mission since the day I put this thing on, to be honest. And my adventures still aren't that crazy. Sometimes I try to tell Tony about some crazy mission, and it's like he's trying to stay awake. Well, you did just fight a small army of Hydra soldiers while flying around Quinjets over a school of geniuses while a giant tiger and giant woman fought inside of it, I noted. That has to earn a few points. Nah, pretty sure the Battle of New York still beats that, Natasha said, walking up to join us. Rhodey nodded in annoyance, though he clearly didn't mind that much. So what now? We go back to the heli-carrier, Natasha said. You going to join us? I should report to my superiors. But I can do that at the carrier, Rhodey said. I'm still needed in this fight if you all will have me. Well, it's not up to me, I noted, rising from my seat. But it's good to have you here. So, I pressed on the Omnitrix and pressed on the dial. Upgrade. Standing up I looked at Rhodey and Natasha. Wanna fly back in style? I asked. The pair shared a look. Natasha grinned. You just want to distract us from telling Tony anything, don't you? Natasha said. Do you want to fly in an upgraded Quinjet or not? Jerks. I turned and walked away as Rhodey chuckled. Chapter 18, on a fun trip with Upgrade. Moments later my black and green form was joined up with our Quinjet as we rocketed through the sky. I did a roll while Rhodey whopped in joy and Natasha smirked, the two piloting me back to the heli-carrier. Hey, Natasha asked suddenly as we flew. How many environments can you survive in? I blinked a singular green eye. What sort do you want me to survive in? Natasha pulled on the controls, guiding me to downwards. Curious, I went where she told me to. Natasha, Rhodey asked. There was nothing but blue ocean below us. Natasha had that confident smirk on her face as she pushed me to go faster until I broke the sound barrier, not letting up on our downward course at all. Natasha, Rhodey yelled in a panic. We slammed into the ocean. My surface adjusted to the impact with ease as we dived further and further down into the cold water. I took my radar and sensors and adjusted them for the ocean while turning my HUD into something that would allow Natasha and Rhodey to see in the dark of the sea as though it was lit by a Hollywood movie crew. Wow, Rhodey said in awe. The bottom of the ocean soon came into view. Still flying at hypersonic speed, I took us to the nearest objects my radar could find. I slowed down and floated upwards when we came closer to the objects I sensed drifting through the waves. Soon, we were in view. A pod of orca whales drifted through the ocean, incredibly massive animals that glided in the water as I flew in to join them. The beautiful animals eyed us as I swam alongside them, the sounds of their clicks surrounding them. Their black and white forms seemed to glide with a grace that left me in awe. The three of us watched for a moment. Rhodey rested his elbows on my dashboard while Natasha rested in her seat and let me pilot myself for a bit. Soon though, I decided to look for something else thanks to a wish to fulfill an old dream of mine. With a bit of regret, I turned around, leaving the orcas behind. I headed towards coordinates after doing a quick Google search, moving through the ocean faster than the world's top fighter jets. It didn't long for me to get where I was headed. Mahmoud. Natasha said. I've always wanted to see this, I said. What? Rhodey asked. You find Atlantis or something? I chuckled at that. No, but we're in the North Atlantic, and according to my GPS, this should be off the coast of Newfoundland at the right coordinates. I'll admit, maybe it's kind of stereotypical of me to think, hey, I can swim to the bottom of the ocean at high speed, I want to go to sea. I trailed off when it came into view. A ship, resting on the bottom of the ocean. Well, the front of one. It was brown and rusted and cracked in various locations. The part where it had torn from its back section looked squashed, as though a giant had pulled it until it snapped. A metal pole rested across the top of it. Despite the decrepit look of the wreck, it had a sort of majesty to it. You could see the remnants of the great ship it had once been. The Quinjet being positively tiny next to it helped. Okay, that is cool, Rhodey said, looking closer. That's, Natasha added softly. The Titanic, I clarified. I've always wanted to see her. It's been a dream of mine since I was a kid. Granted, I wasn't the submarine in my dream. While I could easily see every bit of the ship with my robotic eyes even despite the darkness, I still shone a light across its surface, simply for how cool it looked. We flew around the ship, Rhodey taking photos on his phone and Natasha watching peacefully. After a while, Natasha spoke. Okay, time to go. Unless you have something else you've always wanted to see. I thought about that. Then I rose up, shooting towards the surface. As we slammed into the open air, I kept going, making it clear that my only goal was up towards the sky. Oh come on, Rhodey groaned. Don't tell me you want to see satellites or something. No, I admitted. But I want to see the curvature of the Earth. See if those flat Earth people know what they're talking about. Speaking as a former fighter pilot and current owner of flying power armor capable of going up that high, I guarantee you they aren't, Rhodey said in the dry tones of the severely offended. Passing the clouds, we were soon high enough that blue sky became black night. My rockets glowed green, pushing me through the atmosphere. The rotors in my wings twisted into engines similar to those one would see on fighter jets. Soon, we were out of the atmosphere, in the middle of true space. From there, I turned us around. I could see the Earth's beauty below. I could sense satellites in the distance. The sun glowed with enough power to blind a person without protection, which made me glad I'd prepared for that by polarizing the window for Rhodey and Natasha. And I could sense the moon in the distance. Reaching my sensors out until they were far more powerful than anything on Earth, I found what I was looking for. They were hiding pretty well, but they were there. I hid away that confirmation. Instead, I focused on the view, on the side of the clouds on the planet below, on the sun, burning so beautifully, and the place beyond all that. My sensors became telescopes, and I showed Rhodey and Natasha close-up views of the other planets. None of us said anything. We simply watched the wonder around us in peace. After a moment, we twisted back towards the Earth. I didn't know what to think. The things we had seen. Few people on Earth had seen either the Titanic in its final resting place on the bottom of the ocean or the deep of space with the Earth rolling beneath them. I couldn't imagine many who had ever seen both. Somehow it felt like a privilege. Something I had to earn now. Thanks, Natasha said. I never thought I would see things like that. Me either, I admitted. I wish we had time. With aliens around, there are planets to visit. People we could talk to. There is so much to do out there. Earth isn't good enough for ya? Rhodey asked jokingly. I barked out a laugh. No, of course it is. Our planet is hands down the best, man. We created the telephone. Pretty sure other aliens have the telephone too, Natasha noted. Well, we also made Cinnabon though, I joked. So what? Rhodey asked. You eager to see the aliens your watch turns you into? Flying is the Quinjet. I felt glad I could hide my reaction. I mean, I'll be honest, Rhodey said. I would not like to fight an entire species that can turn helicarriers into their own personal death machines. Or unstoppable monsters like Wrath or Diamond Head. I didn't answer. Natasha clearly noticed my lack of reaction, but I simply flew towards the helicarrier. It might be time to give explanations to the group. Maybe not right that second, but after I'd had a moment to think. Chapter 19, Cowlson is alive. So Rhodey tells me you cheated on him with a giant woman, Tony said a grin as soon as he saw me on the catwalk, staring down at the ocean. He walked up and sat next to me. I mean what, you two join bodies 1 second, then you're hitting on someone else the next? You promiscuous bastard. First off, I said with a scowl. You, of all people, calling me promiscuous dash. He's devastated, Tony said, still grinning. I mean, you two were once one body, one soul, then a red-eyed tart comes along. I've read the tabloids, I'm pretty sure not a single supermodel on Earth hasn't at least heard a crappy pickup line from you dash. I know you're young, but love like the one Rhodey and you share only comes. Wait, did you call my pickup lines crappy? Kid, I've been with more women than you've ever stared longingly at dash. We were arguing in the room that had now become the hangout on the ship, some place that had once been the clear dome on the bottom of the helicarrier. We stood on the catwalk that led to the tower in the center of the room. After a moment, we both ran out of insults, simply staring at the ocean below. Rhodey said you wanted to talk to me about something. Tony asked. I mean, I generally ignore requests, but if you put one in with happy, I snorted. It's about you replicating upgrade. It's about X. It's about a million things. HMF, Tony moved to sit on the catwalk, letting his legs dangle in the air. Well, that's a lot. You want to start with how X is an AI. When I gave him a surprised look, he smirked. Come on, Who are you talking to? Of course, I knew. I figured out he'd evolved almost immediately. Is that possible? I asked. For an AI to develop in a single day? Depends on the AI, Tony said. I've been trying to make something like that myself, to run certain projects. Tony waved for me to sit down. Once I'd done so, he spoke again. Okay, so here's the thing. I want to bring you in on some projects me and a friend have been working on. Usually, you would be too dumb for me to even mention it. I do my best, I said, offended. Losers whine about their best, Tony said without skipping a beat. Anyways, where was I? Oh right. Your watch is the most advanced thing I've seen. Hands down. And jury rig can make some unbelievable things out of literal junk. But if we work together. He removed one of the communications devices we'd made from his ear and held it out. This thing is going to revolutionize how we talk to people, kid. I mean, quantum entanglement? The ability to talk to someone who is across the universe instantly, no worrying about lag or things like light speed. Once we figure out how to make these without jury rig, and mass produce it, it'll change the world. I leaned against the metal railing, swinging my legs as I watched him put it away. You use that watch to turn into mad geniuses. I help you make cool toys, you help me do the same, and I'll pay you. How's that sound? What about S.H.I.E.L.D.? I asked. What, you want to work for them too? Tony asked. Sure, we'll throw it in the contract. Just no sharing anything you make for me with them, not without them paying us a shit ton. Deal. I thought about that for a moment. Working with whatever S.H.I.E.L.D. was going to become, making money by creating things with Tony freaking Stark. That sounded awesome. I'm in, I said. But one thing. We do everything, and I mean everything, to make sure not to create some sort of Skynet machine, okay? If some robot similar to Upgrade got out, we'd all be in some shit. Tony rolled his eyes. All right, fine. I'm serious, I said. I know making robots is cool, but if we do make them, let's make sure they're run by an AI we know isn't crazy, and that any we develop are on a non-networked computer, on the moon, while making sure it knows humans are friends, not fuel. He chuckled, nodding. Yeah, all right kid. Welcome to the Stark Industries R&D department. Bruce is going to love your paranoia. Later we'd arrived at the rendezvous. Sitting in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, with no land in sight for hundreds of miles, was the Iliad. It was kinda funny seeing her in the middle of the water with two inside heli-carriers flying over to join her. Sort of a mesh of the old and new. Quinjets and helicopters came from across the world, carrying S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and personnel from bases everywhere. Our heli-carrier was where the proceedings would take place, so I watched from on top of the command tower as people began to arrive. Tony, Steve, and Clint were with me, all dressed in casual clothes now. I'd chosen to wear a S.H.I.E.L.D. t-shirt and sweatpants as we watched the people come onto the ship in droves. Iron Man's good mood had evaporated by now as we watched a plane with rocket engines slowly hover to land on the flight deck. The black plane, called the bus, was big enough that a parking space had to be set aside for it. I can't believe he was alive all this time, Tony said. He wasn't, I replied. You saw the same files we did. Whatever, temporarily dead. Tony spat out. Damn it, I mourned for that guy. I went to his funeral, I sent his girlfriend flowers and, shit. Steve placed a hand on Tony's shoulder, and didn't look offended when Tony shrugged it off. He has a lot to answer for, but he did sacrifice everything for the world to try and stop Loki. For that, we should give him a moment to try to explain. Explain why he lied to us. Tony shook his head. I'm not wired like that, Steve. It wasn't anything personal, Clint noted. Of course you'd say that, Tony scoffed. I sat down and watched as the bus landed. Soon, the hatch in the back opened, and its occupants came out. In the center stood Philip J. Carlson, the target of Tony's ire. A man who had died, but was brought back to life in a project called Tahiti, one so secret I couldn't find out any specifics about it. With him were 5 other people. Leopold Fitz, a young man with curly brown hair and a mind so brilliant it left me in awe. Standing next to Gemma Simmons, a young woman with long brown hair and a mind for biology that left me just as amazed as Fitz. The two geniuses stood close to each other. Apparently they were together so often people would simply call them Fitzsimmons. Melinda May, an older Asian woman with long black hair, and someone so famous in S.H.I.E.L.D. that the personnel were constantly whispering about the legend of the cavalry. A lot of people were trying to find a way to get her with the other famous fighters of our little fleet to start some sort of tournament between them. Then there was Sky, last name not chosen. Jarvis had found information that she was actually named Mary Sue Poots, which, goddamn, no wonder she changed it. Mary Sue was bad enough to my writer's sensibilities, considering the hatred connected with that name. Poots was freaking ridiculous. She was a skilled hacker, enough for Jarvis to acknowledge her, and was a recent addition to S.H.I.E.L.D. Last was Antoine Triplet, a skilled operative in his own right, and, interestingly, a descendant of a howling commando. He was a tall and extremely fit man, with a well-groomed mustache. The group seemed devastated, a sort of heavy sadness shared between them all, even the stoic-looking May. As they walked forward, I saw Sharon Carter call out to Trip, who smiled. He walked up to her and the two hugged in greeting. Peggy Carter's great-niece and Gabe Jones' grandson, I noted as I watched them speak. Guess it makes sense they know each other. Huh, Tony watched them meet with a complicated look on his face. So did Steve. I say it's just what we need, Clint said. We're rebuilding S.H.I.E.L.D. It only makes sense for the descendants of the people who made it to be there for it. Tony didn't seem to know what to think of that, possibly thinking of his father as he watched his fellow members of the descendants of Steve's Friends Club. We watched Carlson and his team enter the ship. Next came the crew of the Iliad, flying up on a Quinjet. Robert Gonzalez, the captain of the Iliad, was in the center of his team. He'd only brought 3 people, none of whom I recognized, since I'd only checked Carlson team on Tony's behalf. One of them, a tall woman with long black hair, looked like Lucy Lawless from Xena, Warrior Princess though, and the blonde had the same looks as the first officer from the show The Orville, one of my favorite TV shows in my world. They must have been fairly important in this universe. Jarvis, I asked, knowing he was listening over comms. Tell me about the 3 people with Gonzalez. Of course sir, Jarvis said. After a second, he spoke once more. The blonde woman is Dash. Bobby Morse, Clint said fondly. I kept from flinching as I realized I was looking at Mockingbird. Then I realized something. Ex-girlfriend. Clint looked up at me, startled. I grinned at him, as did Tony. Oh my god, Tony said with delight in his voice. 2 super spies dating? Scandalous. Glass houses, Tony, Steve noted. Yeah, like I'd live in one again, but the last one is still rubble in Malibu, Tony said, still grinning at Clint. So what, you guys met while stabbing someone at the same time? Clint sighed in annoyance. Can't you keep bothering Dial about his weird love triangle with Rhodey and a supervillainess? Oh come on. I yelled, annoyed. I'm terrible enough with women without you guys spreading rumors. Nah, Tony said. Girls like guys with a weird sexual history, makes them curious. Plus, can you imagine how useful some of your aliens would be for Dash? Okay, Steve interrupted. He spun around to walk away. Not going to be part of this conversation. Hey Natasha, hey Sam. We all spun to see an amused Black Widow staring at us with a very amused smirk on her face, Sam grinning madly. Catch you ladies at a bad time. Natasha teased. Can you teach me how to flirt? I asked, frustrated. So I can somehow expunge the damage Tony is doing to my romantic reputation. If anything, I'm helping. Tony smiled innocently when I glared at him. Hey, I'm just saying. Some ladies might be into a guy who can turn into aliens like Upgrade Dash. Please no. I plugged my ears in horror. For the love of God. Natasha rolled her eyes at our antics. Then she looked at me. Dial, I unplugged my ears when I saw how serious she was. We need to talk. About everything. Fury sent us, Sam added. Said it was time you told us where you came from, he said apologetically. Okay. But I'm going to need some stuff for that. Chapter 20, Telling Them Truth, Multiverse. Okay, but I'm going to need some stuff for that. Moments later, I'd gathered everyone in a room that had once been dedicated to conferences. Avengers only though. That meant Fury, Tony, Steve, Natasha, and Clint. A small group to learn something that could be earth-shattering. The 5 of them watched as I worked in jury rig form. I was creating a large ring in the center of the room, building it from one of the Hydra armors Natasha had found, a TV, and a broken Quinjet ring. It looked like something I'd seen from a kid's show once, just a metal ring as tall as Natasha with a bottom section attached to the floor, the armor piece stapled to the ring, literally stapled actually, and the flat screen TV broken and attached to the bottom. Soon, I was done. Fix, fix, fix. I cried triumphantly, stepping away. Okay, so what is it? Fury asked. You'll see. I chirped. An entire machine just to tell us where you came from and got the watch. Natasha asked skeptically. And why only us? Clint added. Give him a chance to explain, Steve said. Mahmoud, go ahead. One more thing, I took a deep breath, then tapped the Omnitrix. My red skin became black with green circuits, and I grew far larger in an instant. Upgrade. With that, I joined with the ring. This is called the viewer, I explained as I joined with it. I needed the Chidori parts dash. Chidori? Steve asked, startled. That's where Hydra got them from. They did look familiar, Clint noted. Yeah, I can read their code, I said. But yeah, I needed them for their power. This is going to take a lot, I said. The only way this is going to work is for a couple of minutes. I'm using the arc reactor from this helicarrier to power it, and I need to be upgraded to even work with that. I can't do it for long either. This thing is basically thinning the walls between universes just for a glimpse. You're really not making this clear, Fury said. Are you about to break my ship? No, I said. The fact is, I've tried this before. Shut down the power in my burrow for 3 days and only got static. But with the big arc reactor, my new experience, and upgrade, all working together. I won't keep it up for long, and this thing will implode on itself afterwards, but it will be enough for me to show you guys. Besides, I admitted, I don't want this thing to last too long. I'm worried about who I'll piss off. Now fully integrated into the ring, I took a breath for dramatic effect, since upgrade didn't need air. I am from Oregon. I was born in Oakland. But, not your Oregon, not your Oakland. What? Clint asked. I activated the viewer. The sensation that followed was painful. I pulled in power from the arc reactor, and actually felt the massively powerful engine struggle to keep up with the demand. Even for all of Jury Rig's genius, I felt the ring I'd made almost buckle inwards under the weight of the task. I adjusted myself, advanced the machine in a dozen different ways. I fought through a strange sort of pain, and I felt the energy pull at my nonite body. It was a struggle, but after a fight to stay in control, I was showing an image of Captain America speaking to Black Widow, but not the ones I'd come to know and love. The Captain America here had his mask down, revealing someone very different under it. One I'd only recently become familiar with, but that one of us had known his whole life. Bucky? Steve asked in shock. Whoa, Tony said as he watched Natasha give him a very loving kiss that Bucky returned. Natasha. That. Natasha stared. That's me, but different. It was true. This was comic book Natasha. Slightly taller, with longer hair and a gold belt that held a familiar symbol on the center. She had gold bracers on her wrist. Bucky was clean-shaven, unlike the one getting deprogrammed in another room. His hair was cut, and he wore a blue and black spandex version of Steve's uniform. Well, unstable molecules rather than spandex, but still. This is another reality, I said. A universe where Bucky and Natasha ended up together, according to the scans I'm getting from it. I switched the view to the next place and felt the arc reactor struggle with it, but there was no danger of the machine disappearing on me. Tony uncrossed his arms when he saw himself as a teenager. Is that me, Rhodey, and Pepper? The three of them were standing around in casual clothes with an Iron Man suit in front of them. The teenagers were joking with each other, clearly close. But I didn't meet them until Dash. Not in this reality, I corrected. But there, you have been friends for much longer. Another one. This time, it was Clint. He winced at the sight. Well, shit. Hawkeye was sitting in a chair, his head and limbs strapped to it. He was wearing only a white tank top and orange pants. He'd clearly been tortured and was surrounded by men carrying guns. Is this happening right now? Steve asked, worried. Can we help somehow? Hell, is this even real? Tony asked, apparently fascinated. It is, I answered. But the way this works is that I'm only getting glimpses. This actually happened further back in this world's history. I wouldn't worry though. Why not? Clint asked, clearly disturbed. At that moment, as some guy with a scar over his right eye leaned in towards Hawkeye to taunt him, Hawkeye flicked his right index finger. Scar guy suddenly grabbed his neck, choking on something. Hawkeye did the same with his left index finger, and a soldier had the same reaction. His left then right thumb flicked as well, and more men began to die until they were all done. As they fell, a scientist type who'd been watching the proceedings asked a question. What the hell? He said in shock. Hawkeye responded as a fingernail was held tightly between his fingers. Shouldn't have left my fingernails in, dummy. Now be smart and get me out of here, or this goes right between you eyeballs. Can you do that? Tony asked his universe's Hawkeye in shock as the group stared at the dimensional viewer. No, Clint admitted. Might be worth learning though. Yeah, well, I switched away. The rest of that universe sucks. How do you know? Natasha asked. How do you have those worlds' histories? I felt thankful for my current machine form. It made it easy to lie. I'm scanning them, I explained. It's damn exhausting, but I can get summaries on what I'm showing you. How the hell are you doing that? Clint asked. Mostly news stories and the internet, I said helpfully. But it hurts like hell. This is hurting you. Steve asked, worried. I ignored him to focus once more. The next world made everyone blink. It was a white man with black hair going gray at the sides, sitting at a desk and smoking a cigar as he worked on something. As they watched, Maria Hill walked into view. Well, Maria with an expression on her face as though she'd seen a bad smell. Who is? Oh come on, Fury said when the man lifted his face to reveal the eye patch. In this universe, I explained. You're the descendant, the Nick Fury Jr. to this guy, who has been kept alive since World War II by an experimental drug. Enough, Fury said. How do we know this is all real? That it's not just some trick you've pulled off? Why would I tell this kind of lie? I asked. I'm from another universe. One where superheroes aren't running around. Apparently, one of the few where that is true, according to my scans. Hell, everything I know about this world is from Google and hacking. I had to learn quick so I didn't end up making mistakes in casual conversation. I switched to other views. A man with a giant pair of angular sunglasses was watching the sunset with a sword on his back and a flame-patterned cloak on his back. A giant robot was standing behind him, with two figures walking towards him. A red-headed man and woman in gender-swapped versions of the same brown-shaded clothes speaking to a young woman with black hair and red lips, wearing a white blouse and blue skirt. When the three turned to look curiously at the view screen, I switched away hurriedly. Another world, where three people were fighting against robots with skull-shaped heads, dozens of the steel monsters surrounding them. One of them was a man who wore a red cape and a blue outfit with a S symbol on the front as he fired heat beams from his eyes. There was a woman carrying a sword she used to impale one of the robots, wearing an outfit with a large golden piece of armor over her chest shaped like the letter W, her beauty as clear as her talent in war. The last could barely be seen, more of a black shadow among his more flamboyant comrades, only truly evident by the destroyed robots he left in his wake, simply a mass of darkness that moved like death. We're just one universe of many, I said, showing a world where a boy with white hair and green eyes in a black outfit with the letter D on it fought against a woman who looked like a green female genie, belly dancer outfit included. One of infinity, because the multiverse theory is true. And it's kinda awesome, knowing how unique we are in all this infinity. Then where is your world? Fury asked. I don't know, I said in frustration. I didn't fake it. All the power I had now, even with the pain I was fighting through, and I just couldn't. You don't know. Natasha asked, interrupting my thoughts. Feeling testy, I began to explain. Look, I switched the view over to where, according to my scans, my world should have been, the world with my nephew, with my parents and my crappy room. Instead, all that appeared was static. I got dropped into this universe, and now I can't find mine. Do you want to know something else? I can't find it at any point in its history. Any other universe, even the ones that are destroyed, I can at least view their pasts, but mine? It's just locked out to me. I've got an arc reactor, alien parts burning out, a device built by a mad genius like jury rig, and upgrade backing me up, but I can't pierce through whatever is blocking me. I shouted the last, enraged. It's not just that I can't get home, it's that I can't even fucking see it. I can't see my family, my friends, I can't find out how my mom is taking my disappearance. But no, I can fucking see the Teletubbies in their goddamn house eating fucking pancakes. The group stared at me before I switched off the viewer. I separated from the viewer, looking at Fury, then turned into a human again. So there it is, Fury. If you want, you can try to arrest me or whatever. But I was given the Omnitrix and just dropped into this world like a bad habit. All I'm doing is making the best of a bad situation. Everyone looked over at Fury. He eyed me for a moment. I'm going to have you write a full report. And we're going to still strap you to the lie detector. Oh come on. Tony said exasperatedly. Fury ignored him. You tell me everything you can possibly remember about your life, between your home universe and this one. I don't care if it's a girl who gave you funny feelings in middle school, tell me everything. When I opened my mouth to protest, he stopped me. The council and others will have questions about you. Questions I'll have to answer. So I'm going to give them answers. Fury eyed the machine. And destroy that. What? Clint asked in surprise. I wanted to see me being a badass again. Or see yourself turning evil, Fury said. Or Steve staying in the 40s and having a full life. Tony with kids. An infinity of possibilities, each as slightly possible as the next. Do you all really, and I mean really, want to spend the rest of your life staring into this thing, worried about the lives you might have had? The people you could have loved, who could have lived? Or to suddenly become suspicious of a friend because of the chance they might go bad the way some other version of them did? All the what ifs. I was suddenly glad I hadn't shown them the ultimate Black Widow who had betrayed her team. Having those worlds just out of your reach? People go insane from regular paranoia. Hell, I'm an expert at it. If even thinking about the possibilities can make people do stupid things, what will being able to actually see them do? We looked over at the viewer. I thought of all of that for a moment. Yeah, that was. I think you're right, Steve said, sounding sad. As tempting as it is. Dial. Destroy it. I went over to the dimensional viewer and looked over at Tony. Nothing to say. Tony snorted when everyone looked at him. No, I've got enough issues with my problems in this universe. Besides, I can always make one for myself now that I know it's possible at all. We all thought about that. A moment later, feeling very nervous about working for Tony now, I waved at it. Well, I don't have to destroy it. I'm actually surprised it's still there, it should have dash. The dimensional viewer began to shake. Hawkeye said slowly. Should we leave the room, or dash? The machine pulled into itself and imploded with a sound like gravel exploding. Why is everything you make so weird? Natasha asked. I smiled just a bit. They have personality. I looked over the group. So, we good? Fury smirked. Not really. Not that I don't like you, but you just admitted you have no idea where you got the watch or who dropped you here, and I believe you on that. So I'll still keep an eye on you, simply because it's safer. Steve, Tony, and I all shared an exasperated look. But like I said, I think your heart's in the right place, and you're too useful to us not to bring in. And that's good enough for me. Well, if that was the best I was getting. So that makes me an Avenger. Tony grinned at that. There's the fanboy we all know. Is there even a protocol for new Avengers? Clint asked. So far, no, Natasha said, but with Dial, Sam, and Rhodey in the picture. We'll discuss it later, Steve said, turning and opening the door for us to exit. For now, I'd like to think on what we've seen. Natasha and Tony seemed to still at that, clearly thinking on that. Natasha's eyes flickered in the direction of where Bucky was being held before apparently dismissing the thought that prompted that. Tony rubbed his chin thoughtfully, and Steve sighed while we all filed out. Time has a talk with everyone out there. We have 10 minutes. Yes, Fury said. We're in for the hard part. He walked outside, his long coat flapping as the Avengers and I followed in his wake. Several S.H.I.E.L.D. agents stepped aside, and soon an armed procession took spots along the wall. You all know your roles in this conversation. Now get changed. I want the Avengers at my side when I meet them, and I need you in costume for that. Later, in the men's locker room, Sam had joined us to put his own clothes on. Tony and Rhodey weren't in with us since their armor would just wear itself onto them in seconds, leaving Steve, Clint, Sam, and me. I was putting on my boots, the last part of my costume to go on when Steve came up and tapped me on the shoulder. Hey, he said. I'd like to talk to you in private real quick. Nodding as I tried to guess what this would be about, I finished tying my boots and went to join him in the back. Steve looked around to see if we were alone before speaking. You said doing that, looking between universes, hurt. I wanted to ask if you were okay. I'm good, I said. Just, doing that took a lot out of me. If it wasn't for the ridiculous power of the arc reactor, I wouldn't have been able to do it, and even then I drained the Chitauri armor pieces just to boot the system up. and holding open was like, you ever hold up an impossible weight while having a conversation? A couple of times, Steve said, reminding me just what kind of badass I was talking to. He sighed. And what you said, about being from another world. I think, in some way, I understand how you feel. Yeah, I realized. I guess you'd be one of the few. After all, I wasn't the only one who'd woken up in a world that was so similar and yet so different from home. It takes getting used to, Steve said with a smile. I'm still bad at it. But if you need help, I'm willing to talk. Same, I said warmly. Hell, you ever want to catch up with pop culture? I'm sort of an expert by now. Steve laughed. Well, I have been wondering about anime. When I went on ice we were still having issues with Japan. He scowled. Not that I approve of how that ended, of course. I winced at the thought of the 2 bombs that had ended that conflict. Yeah, well, that's why we're doing this, right? To stop anything like Pearl Harbor or the bombs from ever taking place again. He nodded thoughtfully at that.